table to fill out a slip, even if you registered online. At this time and going forward, no one is to approach the dais. No one is to approach the dais. Chair, we are ready to continue. Chair, we're ready to continue.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, and welcome once again to the hearing for the Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations. I am Councilmember Carlina Rivera, Chair of the committee. Today we will begin with a hearing on the city's 3 library systems, followed by a committee will hear public testimony related to these 2 hearings. With that, I'd like to welcome you to our libraries hearing. This afternoon, we'll be discussing the fiscal 2025 preliminary expense and capital budget for the systems. For fiscal year 2025, the administration is proposing a $420.9 million subsidy for the systems. And with the fiscal year 2025 preliminary capital commitment plan that covers 5 years, 2024 to 2028, that includes $879.9 million for the library systems. But just to be clear, there is certainly a reduction in the subsidy from the amount in the fiscal 2024 adopted budget. And this to our library systems. Libraries, which are an essential presence in every neighborhood of New York, providing indispensable services in a safe and reliable space to the youth, seniors, immigrants, among many, many other New Yorkers and newly arrived New Yorkers. The doors of the library are open to everyone, and libraries are a critical component of moving our society forward. Our library system protects the right to speech and expression and promotes a vibrant civic society and human flourishing. I grew up on the Lower East Side, and libraries were an important part of my childhood. I was raised going to free public library events, and now I take my own family to enjoy the many services public libraries have to offer. Libraries continue to launch groundbreaking initiatives to meet the needs of the diverse communities they serve. Our city's public libraries provide language classes, theater and music performances, access to technology, career and financial services, and many, many other opportunities, all for free. So in the November plan, I was very disappointed to see a baseline reduction to the operation subsidy of the systems. Reductions total $23.6 million in fiscal year 2024, $22 million in the out years. I was further disappointed that even though some pegs for other agencies were restored in the January plan, the library's peg was not. We've seen how cuts have impacted Sunday service across the city, reducing access to youth centers and a safe place to gather and invest in skills. And now the libraries might be forced to adopt 5-day service, cutting another day of service. New Yorkers deserve better, and these cuts are unacceptable. The council calls on the administration to support the library systems by increasing their expense and capital budgets to meet all shortfalls the systems have. It is essential that the budget that we adopt this year is transparent, accountable, and reflective of the priorities and interests of the council and the people we represent. I look forward to an active engagement with the administration over the next few months to ensure the fiscal 2025 adopted budget meets the goals the council has set out. I would like to acknowledge the members who are present. We have council members Osei, Hanif, Hudson, Lewis, and Williams. I would also like to thank my staff for organizing today's hearing, including Chief of Staff Budget Director Katie Loeb, Legislative and Communications Director Eddie Amador, Financial Analyst Sandra Gray, Committee's Counsel Christina Yelamati, and Legislative Policy Analyst Regina Paul. We find ourselves in a time when library capacity is expanding, and yet program hours, which are rising, branch utilization is rising, are all on the chopping block. City funding is being cut, And we are here to get to the bottom of why the administration finds this is appropriate at a time when we know it is so critical. So with that, I will turn to committee counsel.
You can begin your testimony.
Good afternoon. I'm Linda Johnson, President and CEO of Brooklyn Public Library. Thank you, Speaker Adams, Chair Rivera, and members of the committee, Finance Chair Brannan, our Brooklyn delegation, and the entire City Council for your steadfast support. Libraries are the most democratic spaces in our city, and you, our dedicated, outspoken leaders, understand the importance of protecting libraries and the promise we hold for every community. For this, we are grateful. As you know, libraries are facing some of the most significant cuts we have seen in years. In total, $58.3 million for New York City's libraries has been stripped from the fiscal year 2025 preliminary budget. And for the first time in 16 years, the library's capital plans have been reduced by a staggering $130 million. The numbers are overwhelming. We are not blind to the city's financial troubles, but libraries ought to be held harmless. As you know, investments in our libraries yield strong returns. Given the difficulties facing our city, we should be increasing these investments, not slashing them. Today, I ask for your continued support and urge the full restoration and baselining of library funding in the fiscal year 2025 budget. In expense funding, this includes a reversal of the $22.1 million peg to the library's baseline funding, the reinstatement of $20.5 million in mayoral funding, and the restoration of Council's Libraries Initiative funded last year at a level of $15.7 million. In capital funding, we ask you to advocate for a reversal of the capital peg, returning the sorely needed $130 million to our capital plans. The impact of these cuts is untenable and will result in devastating service loss and derailed infrastructure upgrades if they are allowed to proceed. Too often, our libraries are asked to absorb mid-year reductions. The result is an underfunded, thinly staffed system forced to dedicate our precious resources to regaining lost ground in the face of increased costs. This last November, the city's 3 library systems, along with city agencies, sustained a 5% cut to our operating budgets. We have already eliminated universal 7-day service, significantly reduced spending on library materials, programming, and building maintenance, and had to eliminate vacant positions, all of which resulted in disruptions to service. The proposed fiscal year 2025 operating budget will only deepen these service impacts. Brooklyn Public Library alone faces a $16.2 million cut, or 13% of our operating budget. To sustain a loss of this magnitude, we would need to drastically curtail hiring, exacerbating staffing shortages, and our ability to fully our branches would reduce operations to only 5 days a week, and our projections show that after about 9 months, this number will likely increase due to attrition without active hiring and the loss of half of our part-time staff hours. Further, we will have to reduce hours by opening at 1 p.m. on Thursdays, as we already do on Tuesdays, to keep our branches open until 8 p.m. 2 nights a week. Our operating hours have already decreased from 52 hours prior to the November peg to 48 hours currently, an 8% reduction. If these cuts proceed, on July 1st, we will drop to 38-hour operating hours a week, a 27% reduction. Additionally, to help maintain adequate staffing levels, 3 branches due to come back online in fiscal year 2025 after renovations are completed, may not be able to reopen. It is heartbreaking to be in this position when we have invested so much time and money renovating branches the communities deserve to have back online. We are reducing our building hours at a time when our patrons most want to walk through our doors. By nearly every metric, demand for our service increased in 2023 compared to 2022. Program sessions grew by 59%, and program attendance was up by 46%. Notably, visits across the system, new card applications up 42%. New Yorkers are eager to use their local libraries and connect with one another. This fall, I watched as over 600,000 visitors came to Central Library to see the Book of Hove exhibition, breaking previous daily records. Visitors sang, danced, even skipped rope together on our plaza as they not only celebrated a Brooklyn icon, but also checked out their first books in years and found a genuine sense of community and belonging. Similarly, our Level Up program has built a community of over 250 Black female entrepreneurs. Through instructional workshops, mentoring, and financial coaching, these women are working together to accelerate their careers in real estate, finance, and tech sectors, combat systematic and individual discrimination in the job market, and build a more equitable future for New York and beyond. We are proud to bring creative programming and workshops like these to the library, and will continue to look for opportunities to expand our reach. In fact, we have already hosted over 80,000 in-person programs this year, but offering fewer days of service hinders this momentum and means our programming will be significantly curtailed. Though library usage is soaring, we will need to reduce programming budgets by 1/3, impacting all non-grant funded programming. This translates to fewer citizenship classes, fewer visits to senior centers and nursing homes, cuts to creative aging and older adult classes, reduction of the young adult literacy program by half, fewer stipends resulting in fewer teen interns, and unfortunately, scaling back our new and popular Teen Takeover initiative. We have made great strides in the last few years to focus on better serving our younger patrons as they begin to navigate the world outside their homes. With funding from the administration, we have added 5 new teen tech centers, safe spaces where teens can meet their peers, sharpen their digital skills, and express their creativity. However, if the 2025 budget cuts are enacted, the team programming budget will be cut, and one of our new tech centers will close on Saturdays. It's not only our programming that's shrinking, so are our collections. There are 40,000 fewer books on the shelves since the enactment of the November cut, and there will be even fewer in fiscal year 2025, despite increasing demand for physical and digital material. In 2023, our physical and digital collections circulated nearly 10 million items. On top of these collections and programming impacts, there is a dangerous domino effect at play. If these cuts are not reversed, libraries could lose 25% of our state funding. The maintenance of effort clause in the state's library aid statute requires local aid to remain at or above 95% of the prior 2-year average. If the maintenance of effort is triggered in this year's city budget, Brooklyn Public Library stands to lose an additional $2 million in state funding next year. We spend months every year planning for cuts instead of planning more programming. For the millions of New Yorkers who rely on our services, Fighting to regain lost ground every year forces us to be reactive instead of proactive, losing both time and money and opportunities as we navigate our constantly shifting budget. One minute we are recruiting new employees, and the next imposing hiring freezes, driving away the best candidates, and discouraging our staff who are already stretched thin. And all the while, the operational costs of providing quality library services are increasing. Covering the necessary union salary and minimum wage increases will cost an additional $1.8 million for Brooklyn Public Library. The library's share of staff healthcare premiums has increased by $1.4 million. And the operating costs of 2 new locations, the Center for Brooklyn History and the Library for Arts and Culture, are an additional $1.4 million. Operating with these increased costs is tantamount to a cut. Our libraries need more, not less. Our patrons deserve more, not less. So in addition to advocating for a full restoration of library funding, I also urge you to push for the $58.3 million restoration to be baselined. In these increasingly uncertain times, New Yorkers must have stable, reliable, free public spaces. And I must speak about capital for a moment as well. These spaces must be safe, welcoming, and in a state of good repair. While the library's operational funding is of grave concern, our capital funding is also at risk. Brooklyn Public Library is the steward of over 1 million square feet of city-owned facilities, but we lack adequate funding to maintain them. These needs are not new. You have heard it many times. Brooklyn Public Library is an aging system where the average branch is 70 years old and 19 locations are over 100 years old. Our deferred maintenance has grown to over $380 million, 1/3 of which is emergency infrastructure work like roofs, heating, and cooling systems, or fire safety and accessibility needs. Last year, we lost more than 2,200 hours to unplanned closures, stemming from infrastructure needs at 56 of our 62 libraries. What is new is that for the first time since 2008, nearly $47 million of capital funding necessary to maintain the public libraries our patrons rely on has been pulled out of the capital plan. We depend on city support for the maintenance of our physical plant. And of course, without the support of our council members who have funded local projects in their districts and supported us with delegation level funding, we would not have come this far in revitalizing our local libraries. But our progress is at risk. Try as we might to minimize the detrimental impacts of this capital reduction, we have already been forced to eliminate 4 long-awaited renovations, remove funding for several construction projects, and eliminate critical infrastructure funds. A capital cut of this size is unimaginable, and it is even more painful when paired with reduced expense funds. Every year, we are forced to dip into our operating budget to solve urgent capital demands, maintaining old boilers, replacing dilapidated furniture, and funding temporary heating and cooling fixes, while we wait for long overdue capital projects to be completed. This year, there's no cushion to pull from. For example, many of the HVAC systems throughout our branches are in such disrepair that our vendors can no longer service them. It will cost us $500,000 in expense funding this year to bring those units up to a serviceable level. Additionally, nearly $10 million in council-funded capital projects were pushed out 10 years to fiscal 2033 of our capital plan and cannot proceed. This includes 6 projects, several about to begin construction, 2 full branch renovations, and system-wide funding to cover active shortfalls. By delaying projects, we will incur construction cost escalation, increase maintenance costs to keep troubled branches operational, squander design fees, and sustain unplanned branch closures due to failing infrastructure as we endure drastic reductions to the city's operating budget. This will have a catastrophic effect on patrons, staff, and the entire library system. In total, the fiscal year 2025 preliminary budget proposal will have dire consequences for public service, which will in turn have dire consequences for our city. Chair Rivera, members of the committee, the future depends on your leadership and support. Libraries are on the front of mind for so many New Yorkers. If you need a warm hideout, an enriching after-school program, help learning English or filing your taxes, a recommendation for a new book, or simply a quiet space to work, we are the first place you think of. But now, the loss of library service is front of mind for many New Yorkers. Restoring and baselining our funds will barely affect the city's finances, but will greatly affect New Yorkers' lives. You can make a difference for so many of our neighbors by championing libraries and protecting the most democratic spaces in our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ready?
Good afternoon. My name is Tony Marks. I'm the president of the New York Public Library. I want to thank Speaker Adams, Chair Rivera, all the members, and all the members of the City Council for their stalwart support. We're here to testify. I have submitted a testimony. I will be brief and summarize here. Last July, the City Council passed a budget that fully restored libraries for the current fiscal year 24. That was amazing, and we're so grateful. Unfortunately, the victory was short-lived. Libraries received from the administration a mid-year November cut of $23.6 million, nearly two-thirds of the amount that was restored through your great efforts. For the New York Public Library, that included over $10 million. We've already seen the end of Sunday service, which is tragic for New Yorkers. We've had to reduce spending on our collections, our programming that is depended upon by so many, our outreach efforts, our maintenance and repairs. We've had to delay hiring for our amazing colleagues who are the driving force of our systems and what New Yorkers depend upon. As we enter FY25, we are facing $58.3 million. $58.3 million in reductions. The mid-year cut baseline to FY25 is $22.1 million. The one-time mayoral funding from last year is $20.5, and the non-baseline council funding that we depend on is $15.7. A cut of this magnitude to our expense budget is the highest we have faced in the time I have been with the library systems. It includes $25.5 million just for the New York Public Library. We will have to further reduce days and hours of operation. 6-day service will no longer be universal. Unthinkable results in the city at the center of the world. Budgets for pages, who we love and who become our great colleagues, will have to be slashed. The number of branches that have been closed for large-scale renovations and are slated to be reopened, we will not be able to reopen them. Tragic. The staff that we need to operate those budgets we will not be able to hire them. We won't be able to reopen on time. Those include 5 Carnegie branches in the highest need areas of New York that we were so proud to work with the administration to be able to give great restorations. Now we will have to sit on those restored libraries for lack of staffing. These locations are essential in their neighborhoods. And it was only possible because we were in the 10-year capital plan. That happened in 2016. It has not happened since. So we can't even plan, let alone deliver what New Yorkers need. whether it's ADA accessible or dedicated spaces for children and facade restoration and more. How long these delays will be for reopening, it is simply impossible to tell. There may be additional renovated branches that will not be able to open on time. And as you have heard from Linda in her inspiring testimony, we also face, as a result of city cuts, a further reduction in state funding. The maintenance of effort requirement will produce a 25% cut in state funding to libraries. How do all these cuts translate into reality? We are looking at mid-year cuts alone that have meant already 72,000 fewer items in our collections, and the number is projected to jump to over $180,000. We're looking at around 850 hours reduction in our system-wide planned efforts. 50 after-school locations, 20 teen centers, 24 ESOL program centers, 11 tax preparation programs, 40 college and career hubs, all at risk. All been built with City Council and administration partnership, all essential and most used, all now at risk. On the research side, we've already seen reductions from the pegs for staffing. That means more wait times for key research, fewer service points, New Yorkers and all comers less able to do the creative work that we need them all to be able to do. And these cuts come at a time when we've seen New Yorkers returning to their libraries after difficult pandemic and economic years. The city and the mayor's own preliminary management report shows that circulation, program attendance, library card registration, all increasing since FY21. The demand for our services is clear, and therefore the demand for not seeing these cuts, for restoring them and increasing funding, needs to be similarly clear. That is also true on the capital side. As I said, we were in the 10-year capital plan. We are no longer there. We've seen our 10-year capital funding reduced and put into off years. That it translates to a removal of $45.5 million from our capital budget, pushing into out years another $42 million. Our buildings are aging. They need help just to stay open, let alone to be the inspiring and respectful spaces that we should be offering in neighborhoods where our citizens have much too little. They depend on the library, and we will not be able to give it to them. The current cuts to our capital plan will undo much of the progress that Iris and David and my colleagues here have been so proud to deliver. We will simply not be able to deliver. We know as our costs increase that the cuts are even more tragic because the costs of delivering for New Yorkers are going up, and we're seeing our budget decrease. We have to resist this. We have to get past this game that we're in. Months of living on the edge, of planning for the unthinkable, finding costs rising while we're facing our budgets decreasing. We estimate that the unreimbursed cost growth just from next year will be more than $8 million. And again, that's not even calculated into the cuts. We ask simply, humbly, and urgently, please let us restore these cuts, baseline them. Let's stop these games with people's lives, with their future, with what New York stands for. We've had enough. Let's rally together. We know the mayor feels this way as well. Let's all pull together and get New Yorkers what they need. Madam Chair, thank you for this opportunity.
And thank you, Tony. And Madam Chair, it's a pleasure. My name is Dennis Walcott. I have the honor of being the president of the Queens Public Library, and it's always a pleasure to be here with Linda and Tony and testifying before the committee. But at the same time, I hope that one day our testimony will be extremely short when we can come here and say, thank you very much, and then instead of the mic, we drop our library card and leave. And that, to me, would be the ideal setting for us to talk about. But right now, that is not the case. So it's a pleasure to be here, and again, thank you for your leadership as well. Chair Rivera, you have been outstanding. Members of the committee, we thank you for your advocacy. To our speaker, we always thank her for her advocacy as far as libraries and her leadership as well. Right now, we are witnessing before our eyes what happens when a library funding is cut. As a result of the mid-year November pay, not a single library in the city of New York, the greatest city in the world, is open 7 days a week. This is New York City, and that's unacceptable. QPL, Queens Public Library, estimates that since we had to shutter Sunday service at our two busiest libraries, Flushing and Central, we have lost at least 45,000 visits. 1,000 per Sunday at Central and 2,000 per Sunday at Flushing. That is tragic. And it is absolutely astounding to me that we are in a situation where we are seriously discussing the possibility of losing universal 6-day service, which New Yorkers have counted on for nearly a decade, after New Yorkers and the council successfully fought to secure it. In fiscal year 25, cuts stand. If our council funding is not reauthorized, there will be no weekend library service in the borough of Queens, home to 2.4 million people. Weekends are an important time for people to use our libraries. Last year, we had more than 883,000 visits on weekends alone in Queens, and program attendance of more than 125,000. On top of this, we will not have sufficient staff to reopen 3 libraries, Bay Terrace, Broadway, and Hillcrest, once construction work at each one is completed this spring. It really does break my heart, and it breaks the heart of our trusted and dedicated staff, that people will have far less access to our libraries. The proposed budget is a devastating blow to our already strained staffing, our outstanding staff, who work day in and day out to provide the services, but they are strained because of these cuts and resources, forcing us to deepen the reductions we have already had to implement. Although we are here right now pleading with you to reverse the cut we took in November and reverse the additional cuts we are facing, we should be discussing expanding services to meet the profound needs of our communities. We are always there for the city of New York. We are always there for the people of New York, and we want to make sure we continue to expand those needs to serve the public. We have talented and motivated and hardworking staff who are doing outstanding work. They have innovative and creative ideas for doing more. Instead, we are struggling to maintain core services, safe and welcoming spaces, robust collections, meaningful programs, and access to technology. We know that people across the city, our children, our teens, our families, adult learners, job seekers, seniors, new Americans trust and count on libraries to give them opportunities to learn, to grow, and find success. We know that libraries have the power to change lives. It changed my life. And it pains me that we are not even close to having the funding we need to give them the libraries they deserve. Even if our funding is fully restored, as indicated by Linda and Tony, the city's allocation would still fall short of our needs because of our escalating costs related to meeting the contractual salary obligations, minimum wage, and health insurance increases, and other expenses as well. On top of the reductions to our operating budget, QPL had a $32 million capital program to eliminate the gap, a PEG, which significantly limits our ability to cover shortfalls for ongoing projects. No organization Not a single organization can plan effectively for the future with the way our funding cycle works. A hopefully restored budget at the start of the fiscal year, cuts or proposed cuts in the middle of the fiscal year, a cut for the next fiscal year, and then battle for restoration again. Think about that. It's a constant treadmill, and it's no way to plan and run an institution like our libraries. Imagine what libraries could do for the people of our great city with steady, reliable, and adequate investment. For example, extending our operational hours at all of our locations, morning, evenings, and weekends. I have dreams, and we have dreams of how we can continue to expand our services to programs. Inspiring spaces that Linda always talks about with the state-of-the-art technology and reliable infrastructure. So important. Renovated buildings that allow us to adapt with the evolving needs of our communities. Our communities are changing before our eyes, and our libraries need to change with them. And cuts constantly hamper us in doing that. We need to be responsive to the changing demographics of New York City, because New York City is a magnet for all people, and we are here to serve the entire demographic population of New York City. Not needing to turn away customers who are seeking ESOL, citizenship, job and business help, or any other service they are seeking. We are here for the public. Every location having enhanced educational enrichment programs for children and teens. I always share the story. One time I was out at a Peninsula Library. It was a Saturday, a rainy day, and the library was jam-packed. Just imagine if we have to make further cuts, those services for the people who were there to get the library services at Peninsula, like libraries across the city, will no longer be able to do that. Libraries are the catalyst for our city's dreams, and we trust that with your steadfast advocacy, we can see our budgets restored and keep those dreams alive. Chair Rivera, committee members, thank you for the opportunity to speak, and wishing you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate the support that you all give each other. It's really something lovely to see. I don't mean to steal from your testimony, Tony. I know you kept it brief, but you had a line in here that I thought really encapsulated the issue that we're facing here, which is for less than half of 1% of the total budget, the library has proved itself unmatched in its ability to reach our communities. And some of my opening questions were around the impact itself on the programs and services, but I thought the three of you did a really wonderful job in being comprehensive in conveying that. And I'm going to go through a quick list of just some of the things that I jotted down that you all mentioned. Citizenship classes, classes for older adults, adult literacy, fewer visits to senior centers and nursing homes, deferred maintenance and infrastructure upgrades, fewer books, less outreach, a pause in hiring, an adverse impact on civic engagement. I know my colleagues here who all want to ask questions. We've done mobile offices, Omni events, IDNYC. I've personally done Council 101 in the basement of Tompkins Square Park. And these are incredible places that welcome everyone and certainly feel friendly and quite peaceful. So I want to thank you for that. Let's ask a little bit of some of the impact that you did mention. So what changes, maybe that I failed to capture in that checklist, did the systems have to incorporate to absorb these reductions? I went through a lot of them.
I'll just jump in. You've already covered so much of the details. I'll just go to just make the point that when we have to close, when our doors are closed, whether it's because of the funding reductions or because the funding reductions mean we can't do the repairs that are necessary to keep our doors open, let alone the renovations that are essential. it's really, the effect on the citizenry could not be more powerful. These are the most trusted, the most used civic institutions in New York. We are in every neighborhood, neighborhoods that are not served in any other way. New Yorkers know they can always come to the library. It's in a world and a time when it's not clear who you can trust, who you can believe, who you can rely on. The libraries are the one thing that the real people of New York in our neighborhoods know. What message are we sending? Never mind what we can't actually do. What message are we sending to our brothers and sisters, to our children, that says, no, you can't rely on the one thing you thought you could rely on, the one thing that is dedicated to what this city stands for and delivering on making opportunity possible. It's what makes this city go. And when we have to close, the city stops delivering. And we are all heartbroken at that prospect. This is New York. We can do better than this.
So if I may, I mean, one of the concrete things, it really pains me to see this and say this, but when our Broadway library will be ready to open in a little while, it won't be open. Plain and simple, because we don't have the staff to staff it properly. And we have a brand new computer center there. And as a result of that, you'll have people walking by a library and they look in and say, what the heck is going on? And rightfully so, to be angry and not receive services there. That to me is one concrete example. When I look at our council member from Flushing here, and we don't have Flushing open on a Sunday because the library can't staff it and pay for it at this particular point in time based on the budget cuts, it pains me. Those are concrete things. Something like a mobile library. I mean, we have our mobile library out on a regular basis, but we will not be able to have our mobile libraries out on a Saturday at all because we can't have staff to staff it. And then when we had those extra hours to maybe have it out on a Sunday, we won't be able to do that. And the mobile library reaches the communities at their point of contact, so they don't have to come to our buildings. I mean, those are some of the other types of things that we face, much less the regular hours that we have, and not having the ability to have regular hours. And then not to steal Linda's thunder, because I always like the way I hear Linda always say it, but with the infrastructure work, I mean, you have to delay projects? That's ridiculous. And then on top of that, pushing money out to 33, and when those projects are ready to launch now, so our aging buildings will look either refreshed or to have new buildings. I mean, those are all real examples. Those are not dramatic examples just to make a point. Those are things that we have a decision to make on how we balance our budget based on the projected cuts itself. So I think those are some of the real things, in addition to less services and less hours available for people to come in on weekends and during the weekday.
Hard to add anything at this point, but I think the important thing to understand is that all the work we do is really dependent on the people who work with and for us. And the great library workers, librarians, in every single category of employees, if we start cutting that back, it has this ripple effect across the system, which is, of course, to cut hours, which then in turn cuts programming. It affects our ability to keep capital projects on course. And we all talk about this quite a lot, and the reason is because there's really not very many places we have to cut. And so when you're looking at cuts of the size that are being proposed, our only choice is to continue to skinny down our staff, which ultimately means we just won't be there for the community. And I think that the point really that Tony makes about the city of New York and and what this act communicates to the people of New York is really devastating, right? It really is that we don't care enough about the education of our citizenry. And that's a tough thing to grapple with.
You know, on top of that, I mean, well, I think we've talked about it in our testimony, but fewer books. I mean, personnel collections. That's our basic bottom line. Personnel collections. We'll say it over and over again. Fewer personnel to provide the program services, fewer books and collection material for the public itself. So when they come in to look at the shelves for a book per se, or they go for their ebook, and they say, wait a minute, it's not there because we didn't have the money to fund it. And that's where the base of the funding is from. And as a result of that, that will have a direct impact as far as what the cuts mean.
Can I just add another example? So again, with thanks to the administration, to the city council, we got into the 10-year capital plan. It's almost 10 years ago. It took us 100 years to get into that plan so that we could actually deliver in a meaningful and in a planned way. We said, okay, what do we, at New York Public Library, we said, we've got 5 Carnegie amazing structures, you know, just inspiring structures that had fallen into deep disrepair and happened to be in some of the poorest neighborhoods of New York, where people depend on us even more. We said, let's spend that $100 million to create inspiring, amazing libraries again, where they are most needed. And we are ready to deliver. And now the administration says, we don't have the money to give you to staff those libraries. In Port Richmond, Councilmember Hanks, we are so proud that we are going to have this amazing new Carnegie ready to reopen, and we will not be able to open it until we get the funding necessary to make that possible. That is tragic for New Yorkers who depend and love their libraries and need to know they will be open. Help us. Let's not do this.
Well, thank you. I want to say we have been joined by Council Members Hanks and Ung. I think we all agree on the messaging. Not too long ago, we had a hearing on book banning, and to recently see in the news books about the queer experience in the trash beside a school, fewer books on the shelves. It's all related to how important it is to see representation on those bookshelves. The young people, the increase in Gen Z attending the library and creating that safe space. And you all mentioned head count as well. What is the total number of employees at each of the systems?
Well, we're already down. So at full complement, we're at 1,200.
We're at 2,700 roughly, proudly so, with great workers, great colleagues, DC 37 doing an amazing job, but if we don't have the funding, we can't have the colleagues we need. We can't maintain them. The last thing we want to see is reducing that number. That would be tragic for everyone.
Do you know what percentage of the employees are represented by unions?
In our case, it's 82%.
Ours is 90 plus, and we have 1,450 full and part-time employees, but again, that number is getting smaller and smaller, and we're shrinking, and that's to us unacceptable.
How many vacancies does each system have?
Vacancies. How many vacancies?
Give you an exact number.
We're going to get you that number, but I can tell you that we're doing controlled hiring. Hiring is largely frozen at this point. So those, for instance, are in the Bronx, where we need to hire more. It adds to the tragedy when we cannot hire in the neighborhoods that most need us to have the staff to deliver.
We have 83 vacancies.
We have 146 vacancies.
Is the city providing any additional funding to the systems for provision of services to asylum seekers?
No.
I've personally seen the way you all have transformed your space to accompany languages and families who are now going there for services that are newly arrived. So that is a disappointment, to say the least. What percentage of the system's budget is city funding?
With Queens, it's 92% roughly.
For the New York Public Library, it's closer to, it's just over half, maybe 60%. That's because we're a private trust that raises money and has an endowment that enables us to provide the research libraries to all New Yorkers for all 5 boroughs. We fund that privately. We're proud to do it as a public-private partnership. But if we're getting city cuts, that has an effect on our research libraries and also on our ability to continue to raise the money to partner with the city.
In Brooklyn, the percentage of city funding is 85%, and I just want to correct myself because we did receive some money from Moya for providing ESOL classes in Spanish.
And I know how much time you all spent privately fundraising, so I realize that's a majority of your time is doing that. When you look at the state is currently negotiating their budget as well. How have the November plan baseline expense pegs impacted state expense funding?
We haven't seen a reduction in state funding. We're grateful to the state. It works on formula. We're grateful for that too. But we have now learned, because we face cuts that are unprecedented, at least in my time, we've learned about a threat that we didn't even sort of fully focus on before, which is the state eager to make sure that the city will maintain its effort, maintain its investment in libraries. One of the ways the state does that is to create a penalty if the city fails to do that. 2 years of 5% cuts triggers a 25% cut in for New York Public Library, $20 million we get from the state. That means rather than protecting us, which is what the state was trying to do, the legislation forces the state to reduce us significantly in addition to the reduction of city cuts. It's a piling on that will have terrible results for everyone, and we know the governor is eager for that not to happen, that our colleagues in Albany are eager, just as the city council and the mayor are eager to make sure that doesn't happen. But that is what we are also facing at this juncture.
So with capital projects, what obstacles and delays do you face in starting and completing capital projects, and how can this process be improved?
So several things. One, with the capital process, the PEG could be just totally restored, and that would basically address our needs. In addition to that, as Linda and others have indicated, Tony has indicated, that the push out to 33 just stops projects dead in their tracks and will not be funding for us to kick projects off that we've been planning for a long period of time. So the various districts throughout the city will be impacted in having buildings that are potentially closed as a result of infrastructure problems. Part of the balancing act that we always do is the capitally eligible capital projects versus those capital projects that may not be capitally eligible, and then having expense money to pay for that. Now we'll suffer on both sides of the coin, in that we'll have fewer capital dollars available, and then we'll have fewer expense dollars, and that'll double impact the capital infrastructure needs of our buildings.
In addition, as we've all testified, our systems are aging. We all have libraries from different eras. The Carnegie libraries, perhaps the most cherished just because of their historical significance, are also the most expensive to maintain. And we've been told by OMB that we should not be forecasting new capital projects. But at the same time, we have $13.8 million in new needs. And those needs get more expensive as time passes. Obviously, the sooner you can correct an issue, the less costly it is to do the renovation. So in the case of projects where we've already designed the work and we're ready to go, but we've been told not to start, that means we've squandered the design money, which is not nothing.
Right.
And in the case of of buildings that are in disrepair, the longer the problems languish, the more expensive they get to fix. And that's sort of part of how we got here in the first place. It's why we all have such significant deferred maintenance numbers.
And I imagine the increase in capacity that you have had with the projects that were completed, now you have to staff them, and that's
Yeah,
been
well,
a challenge.
that's a separate problem, which is that we have a couple of libraries that are ready to come online. We being the city, we being you, City Council, and the administration have spent significant dollars on capital projects that are ready to go, and the public will, benefit greatly and no doubt will start using them immediately. We just opened a library in Sunset Park that had been closed for years, and within days, it was though that library had been operating at full bore forever. And so the sin of that is all the money that's been poured into these projects, not to have the operating budget to be able to staff them it's hard to even talk about that.
Madam Chair, I'm going to be brief but strong on this one. The mayor, the city have invested hundreds of millions of dollars in our renovations, which were essential. Projected at $1 billion. When we invested, we were ready to deliver. Now we're going to have to hold on opening already renovated branches in the neighborhoods most in need of those branches. That is terrifying. We won't have the expense budget just to do the emergency repairs to keep our other branches open, let alone in the state of inspiring physicality that they need to be. I've never seen this before. We're now seeing a $45 million cut in January to our capital budget, and another $41 million pushed out a decade. We might as well not have it. Let's stop playing games. If we don't get funding for capital in a serious, committed, dependable way, that's what the 10-year capital plan is for, we can't deliver, and money gets wasted. People's lives get wasted because they can't come into our libraries. The city, the mayor knows full well what we are facing here. He put a task force together because we all know that when we work with DDC, we love those folks, but when we work with them, we get half as much done and twice as much time for twice as much money. We'd love to be able to step up, even with private dollars, to partner more to solve this problem. But if we can't depend on the city to deliver the basics, then we can't partner with you. We can't help solve this problem, which we are so eager to do.
And you'll hear this from your colleagues in culture as well. This is the process of DCLA and then DDC for some of these projects feels like a duplication of efforts. However helpful each agency might be, there's certainly a way to streamline the process to make it more efficient. And my last question before I go to my colleagues is, the preliminary mayor's management report showed an increase across all three systems in usage and in program sessions, which is, I guess, somewhat ironic considering the cuts. What was the primary driver of this increase?
Trust, consistency, creativity, dedicated folks who work for the library. The community knows who their local librarians, their managers, their customer service reps are. Great programming on all of our parts as far as the programming that fits the need of the population. Outreach to the community, having mobile libraries out in the community on a regular basis, having staff out on a regular basis, going to local events. All of those things allow us to increase the number of card holders, people coming through our doors, people participating in programs, having ESOL classes that meet the needs of the various new speaking groups who are part of the city of New York. All of that allows for people to take advantage of who we are. We are the best return on investment that exists in the world, quite frankly. People get us, they know us, they trust us. That's the bottom line. I mean, there's no script along that line. We're a library system. We're great. Talk to each person, and they know their childhood library. They have their horror library story. Oh, well, how much money did I owe when I was a kid? Fines have been waived. I mean, those are the things that attract people to our doors. And people talked about it outside. Feeling safe. Parents, grandparents, people who are homeless, they come in to the library because they feel safe there. They know we won't hassle them. That's what drives the numbers up over and over and more.
I will tell you, Hamilton Fish was like my around-the-corner library, and when I was a kid, they gave me a free copy of Strega Nona, which is, classic, of course, Magic Spaghetti, and I still have it, and I can't wait to read it to my kids. So I know you have more to add, but I want to make sure, because I'm sure my colleagues are going to ask something similar to this. We're going to go to council members Hudson for questions, and then Lewis.
Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you for that.
I just have 2 questions, I believe. But the first one is, since its founding in 2016, CUNY Cultural Corps has connected more than 1,070 students with paid internships in New York City's cultural sector in partnership with DCLA, including 169 students who are currently participating in FY24. According to a 2023 alumni survey, 60% of respondents reported that they are working or had worked in the cultural sector after their internship. Can you share what plans the city has to continue to support this essential pipeline for a diverse and thriving cultural sector?
We do quite a lot with internships at Brooklyn Public Library, including with CUNY and SUNY. We're working on one. And we have, and this is actually one of the things at risk, which makes me extremely uncomfortable, but that we do a lot of work which allow us to pay stipends to teens for the work that they're doing. In fact, on the Books Unbanned project, we have teenagers who are teaching people around the country how to advocate for themselves, so that these programs that are providing material to students across the country, they're also providing opportunities for teenagers in Brooklyn to enhance their skills, and they're being compensated for that. And these kinds of programs, which are creative and which have benefits for not only the recipients of the service, but also for those who are providing it, those are the things that make us special, and we hate the idea of needing to cut those.
I'll just add that we're particularly proud of our PAGE program. It's been a pipeline for so many of our folks start in high school, and they love this work. It is unique for the unique opportunity, and I think the majority of our frontline workforce started as pages. This isn't just sort of theoretical pipeline. This is real pipeline to amazing jobs that create our amazing colleagues who deliver the goods for New Yorkers. All of that is in jeopardy under this budget.
Yeah, we do internships with our colleges and also high schools. We have a pipeline, as indicated before, with pages. I mean, so there's a constant reinforcement and partnership with various institutions to make sure that there's that connectivity between the libraries and the communities that we're there to serve and work with.
Yeah, I would just add one thing, which is, Tony spoke about jobs. I would just modify it slightly to say that what we're really doing is giving students, younger students, the opportunity for really lifelong, enriching careers. These are people who are deeply committed to the work of the library.
Absolutely. And can I just ask one other question? Thank you. In the FY24 adopted budget, the City Council allocated an additional $15.7 million subsidy support for the systems. How did the systems use this one-time funding? And was it adequate?
So for us, it was a lifeline of help and tremendous support, both from capital needs and dealing with emergency needs and some programs as well. And what we decided to do is to make sure we developed a clear itemization of the use of those dollars as well and broke it down to show the return again on the investment. So we were able to definitely take advantage of that money to deal with the necessary needs of the organization, both from an expense programmatic side as well as a capital side. And you asked a question that is a lovely open-ended question, was it enough? It's never enough, but it was perfect, though, as far as filling the needs that we had to address emergency types of responses.
In Brooklyn, we spent $2.1 million for 19 public service positions, people who are in the neighborhoods interacting with the community, $710,000 for the care and maintenance of our buildings, and $1.5 million for our collections.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councilmember Lewis, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for your testimony today. Councilmember Hudson asked my last question, but I have a follow-up to it, so I'll ask all three. So I wanted to know, how has the November PEG impacted women's programming, like the Level Up, as well as Level Up Black Female Entrepreneurship Program that was mentioned in testimony, Teen Takeover, and the Teen Tech programs? I also wanted to know the programs that provide language access for BIPOC communities like IDNYC. How has the PEG impacted those programs, and what does the current infrastructure for those programs look like right now with that PEG? And the last question is in regards to the $15.7 million. I heard the quick breakdown for Brooklyn, but I just wanted to know, if restored, the $15.7 million, will that be a sufficient amount if it's baselined through the mayor's office?
I'll start just because it was directed at Brooklyn. I'll echo the comment that it's never enough. I think the thing about libraries is the better funded we are, the more work we can do, and it feels to us anyway that there's always more to be done. There's always ways to do better, to get people the information and the knowledge they need, but to continue to build and cement the communities that we serve. And so we are deeply appreciative, and any penny you give us, we're going to put to good use. So thank you for that. In terms of the specific questions about how the PEG impacted our delivery of service, I would say that what we've done is we've lost 55 full-time public-facing positions through attrition and vacancy elimination. So the domino effect of that, of course, is that we've suspended, as we've testified, we've suspended 7-day service. And so we keep reducing hours, which means that we reduce programs, which means there are fewer opportunities for our patrons to come into our branches to take advantage of those programs. And that's really the spiral that we're on, and that we're worried about sort of where we are today, but where we could get if we don't get these proposed cuts restored.
And that includes the IDNYC, because I see long lines by Central Branch with migrants.
The IDNYC lines are long. We were actually in jeopardy of losing our IDNYC offices, but fortunately, wiser heads prevailed. It's the same issue. There are lines at the IDNYC centers, and it's just a matter of how many we can process. And so if we have shorter hours, we'll process fewer.
And the 15.7, that's sustainable for the entire system if it's baselined?
It's extremely sustainable, but always more helps.
Yeah.
Because again, that money has allowed us, we probably treat it a little differently, each system, but to allow us to deal with emergency repairs, capital needs, and also various types of programs to plug as well. So it's been very beneficial, I think, to all three systems, and more is always better. And we respect, though, the amount that we have as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I just want to ask a couple more questions. You all have done so much for the families, and specifically The asylum seekers piece I just keep coming back to, because I know you've seen an increase just in attendance and like physical presence of people. I mean, just in an Epiphany library, we've done IDNYC, library cards, just tremendous things in this, you know, little part of Manhattan. Are you thinking of, and I know you're very strained by the budget limitations, but have you considered any sort of like workforce programs or maybe like a job component, some sort of programming to accommodate the population in the future?
Well, we're all doing a lot of work in the workforce development space. And of course, the demand has increased with the advent of our new neighbors. We're also doing a lot to go outside of our four walls and deliver service right into some of the shelters where they're living, providing knapsacks for kids with books, and really trying to invite them into the library and to educate people who are new about all the things and resources that we have that will make their lives better.
Go ahead, after you tell me.
I'll just reiterate, Madam Chair. I mean, we have for 125 years been the place where immigrants have come, because this is a city of immigrants. It's why we are the center of the world, why we are so strong, because of waves of talent eager to come to this city and to work. And the libraries have been the first place they come, because they know, they hear from their neighbors, from their friends, you can trust us. We don't, as Dennis says, we don't ask for your papers, we don't ask anything. We're here to serve. And that is true of the latest wave of folks who have joined us in New York. We're proud to serve them, as we have always been proud. We don't say you're different because you're asylum seekers. You're part of New York, part of the strength of New York. We can't deliver what those folks, what everyone needs, if our doors are closed, if we don't have the amazing staff, if we've had to reduce our pages or our teen ambassadors. All of those are part of our workforce efforts. None of it works if we don't have the funding.
Yeah, in Queens, we have our Job and Business Academy, but again, as a result of the cuts, we can't staff it at the level that it had been staffed before. We have our workforce development folks who are there to work with the community and people, no matter who they are, who come through our doors. But again, it's all connected in that we have fewer people on staff, fewer hours, then the people won't be able to take advantage of the experts that we have who are sitting behind me or in our libraries right now. And that, to me, is the tragedy that we face.
I think it's safe to say in restoring the cuts and bringing back us leveled and then talking of expansion is how we would get these critical programs back online and expanded the way that we need them. So I guess my last question is, what would be required for the libraries to remain open 7 days a week?
So let me take the first step. First, we get restored, and that's 58.3. Then for Queens, I know it's a specific amount, and each of us have our unique amounts, but to meet the cuts that we talked about, or the unfunded program expenses that we have with minimum wage increases, contractual obligations that have to be met, that's an additional $5 million. But then to be creative, there's additional money on top of that as well, because again, that's just the expense side of the budget. And then we also have to make sure, and you've heard us talk more and more this time about the capital restorations as well, because that's a key part of this whole equation. Because if we don't have the work done in the buildings, then we have buildings that are in poor state of condition, then the people will not be able to get quality services. So that also factors in. So a full restoration of our capital budget and not pushing the budget out to fiscal year 33. So that's just the start, I think, of the discussion of how we can both restore but then build on top of that restoration.
Madam Chair, we would love to join a conversation, a serious conversation about 7-day service, which is what New Yorkers should have. It's actually what a contract with Andrew Carnegie says they will have and that the city is committed to funding. But let's be serious. We're sitting here facing unprecedented cuts. We're begging to be restored. Our costs go up. We should be talking about increased investment, given the return on that investment, which you've heard eloquently from my colleagues. We should be talking about that. We're not even talking about that. And none of that gets us to 7-day service. We'd love to have a serious conversation. We need to have a conversation with our union about that, because we can't require Sunday work. But we would love to have that conversation. We are way far away from having that serious a conversation.
However, I do have some numbers, because I can tell you that what restoration does, which would be great, but given the increase in the costs of doing business, I have a list of things that total to $5.3 million over and above what restoration would do for us, that somehow we'll have to figure out how to cover. So restoration would be terrific, and we wouldn't look a gift horse in the mouth. However, to really be whole, we need, in Brooklyn alone, over $5 million to get to a point where we're able to do business in the way we were doing business before.
Yeah, mine is 5.
What about the capital budget restoration funding amount? Do you have that?
47 million.
We're about the same? 32? 34. 34 mil.
For us, it's 45.5, plus the 41.4 that's in the budget, but been pushed so far out into the future that it basically might as well not be there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all. I don't know if any of my colleagues have any further questions. I want to thank you for your testimony, for your time. We all have incredible memories, but we also know we have a duty and an obligation to support you. So thank you for your testimony. Thank you to all of the people here that are representing your systems, who obviously care so deeply about their work. And we look forward to negotiating and fighting on your behalf.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members of the council.
Thank you so
Speaker.
much. Thank you for all your support, everything you do. It's great to work with you.
We're going to take a brief recess and then bring DCLA to the dais. So thank you, everyone, and hang tight.
This sucks. Sucks. It's just pathetic. It's ridiculous. I'm starting to get angry. You don't want me angry. It's not good. What, they're not going to get? Where's it going to go? Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. If everybody could just find a seat, please. If everybody could just find a seat, we're getting ready to begin. Once again, as a reminder, if you are testifying, you have to fill out a testimony slip at the Sergeant at Arms table, even if you already registered online. Good afternoon, good afternoon. If you already registered, can you please find a seat? If you already registered to testify, can you please find a seat? Thank you. Can everybody settle down? We're getting ready to begin. Chair, we're all set.
Good afternoon. We are set to begin. Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to this hearing for the Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations. I am Councilmember Carlina Rivera, Chair of this committee. This afternoon, we will be discussing the fiscal 2025 preliminary expense budget for DCLA, which stands at $144.8 million, and the fiscal 2025 preliminary capital commitment plan that includes $1.1 billion in fiscal 2024 to 2028 for the department. At the urging of the Council, the administration added approximately $40 million at adoption of the fiscal 2024 plan. The Council is disappointed that the funding is not included in the fiscal 2025 preliminary plan, but additionally, the administration has implemented an additional $11.6 million PEG in fiscal 2024 and approximately $7.6 million in the out years. This is on top of the November plan PEG of $9.3 million in fiscal 2024 and $8 million in the out years, for a total of $21 million in cuts to culture in the middle of this year and over $15 million in cuts for future years. The mid-year baseline cuts to culture and arts are a proposal to further draw back from the city's obligation to support the arts, and it comes at a time when cultural organizations are still recovering from the debilitating impact of the pandemic. Further, at a time when the importance of diversity is being highlighted, especially by this administration, it seems that our cultural institutions, especially those in the BIPOC community, are faring worse than ever. Baseline funding has not changed since 2009, and through the pandemic and inflation, the agency remains stagnant. What is the administration's rationale for cutting support for arts and culture when it acts as an economic engine that generates critical revenue for the city? These cuts are resulting in budget shortfalls, already undercutting program delivery and endangering jobs. Cuts to culture have devastating impacts on multiple layers of economic activity. Locally, we're telling groups it's their time, for groups that are often overlooked to come and take their place. We have finally recognized the Lenape people. We have celebrated the upcoming Hip Hop Museum in multiple iterations and categorized it as the one to watch. And we say again and again that culture is our lifeline. And yet we pull back programming and operational dollars for this very sector? How can we make cuts to institutions and groups so core to our New York City identity and the reason people come to visit and live here? Time Out magazine recently ranked New York City the best city in the world, and its editors credited arts and culture almost exclusively for achieving this ranking. It was a ranking and it was news that was highlighted in the State of the City by Mayor Adams. In fact, he held up this very article proudly. It's clear and widely known that public investments help organizations attract private donations, create and protect jobs, and keep arts and culture accessible for communities through the city. These investments are critical to bolstering local economies, create good-paying jobs, and driving economic activity. It is the Council's responsibility to ensure that the city's budget is fair, transparent, and accountable to New Yorkers. Our cultural organizations provide welcoming public spaces for our community, creating positive social impact. As the chair of the Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, International Intergroup Relations, I will continue to push for accountability and accuracy and ensure that the budget reflects the needs and interests of the city. It is essential that the budget that we adopt this year is reflective of the priorities and interests of the Council and the people we represent. This hearing is a vital part of that process, and I expect that DCLA will be responsive to the questions and concerns of Council members. I look forward to an active engagement with the administration over the next few months to ensure that the fiscal 2025 adopted budget meets the goals the Council has set out. I would like to recognize the members of the committee that are present. We have Council members Natasha Williams, Farrah Lewis, Crystal Hudson, and David Carr. I would also like to thank my staff for organizing today's hearing. Katie Loeb, Eddie Amador, financial analyst Sandra Gray, committee counsel Christina Yelamati, and legislative policy analyst Regina Paul. And I want to thank everyone else who is here as well for their presence, their testimony, and their continued commitment and compassion to the sector that we so desperately need. With that, I'll turn it over to committee counsel.
Hi, good afternoon. Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions?
I do.
Thank you. You may begin when ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Rivera and members of the committee. I am Lori Cumbo, Commissioner of the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, here to testify in regards to DCLA's proposed fiscal year 2025 preliminary budget. I am joined today by a number of my colleagues from the agency, and just want to say it has been so exciting to see so many of you in your districts. Today I had an opportunity just this morning to have a meeting about Councilmember Carr's Staten Island Zoo, as well as a conversation with PS9, which is a blue ribbon school in your district, who also want a larger building. But had that wonderful conversation, and Councilmember Hudson, we've been having active conversations about L10 in your district, and looking forward to delivering on this project in such a substantial way. And Councilmember Lewis, I remember I was very excited to come to your district on Flatbush Avenue in a new cultural center promoting Haitian art and culture, and it was a fascinating and exciting opportunity. And I just saw Councilmember Williams just this weekend. The Black Art Fair that you all produced in your district was powerful, it was exciting, and it was an incredible way to see new talent that's on the horizon, and you were so proudly there supporting all of your artists, and thank you for the social media post on that as well. Before I get started, I just wanted to take a moment to reflect on Women's Herstory Month, especially as a woman-led agency testifies before a woman-led committee. And my team's research indicates that you are the first woman to chair this committee since it was established as a standalone committee. So congratulations on being the first woman to chair this committee. Look at that, getting you kudos before the hearing even begins. But I'll take it one even better. You and I also share something in common. We are two of the council members from this term as well as last session who gave birth while running for office and successfully won. So it's so exciting to see women assuming so many leadership roles throughout the city, something that this month provides a perfect moment to reflect upon. I will start my testimony today with a quick review of the numbers. For fiscal year 25, the preliminary budget allocates a total of $143.9 million for the agency. This includes $24.9 million for the Cultural Development Fund, $108.7 million for the Cultural Institutions Group, $7.4 million for agency operations and staffing, $2.92 million for Create NYC initiatives, energy support, and other funding for culturals. These figures do reflect the programs to eliminate the gap, also known as PEGs, required by the mayor last November and again in January. Note that they are and do not reflect any one-time funding typically added at adoption, such as council initiatives and member items, and that's where our partnership comes together. At this point in the process last year, DCLA's preliminary budget stood at $149.5 million. I want to say up front here, we understand the immense challenges that any reduction to DCLA's budget presents for the groups we support. But all agencies were asked to do their part and make reductions in light of the unprecedented fiscal challenges we're facing as a city. DCLA was had unprecedented fiscal challenges, but we were exempted from 4 prior rounds of PEGs, and thanks to this prudent financial planning, the mayor was able to cancel the PEG that was being expected in April of this year. We have also gotten the green light to fill several open positions at the agency following a hiring freeze, which is going to help critically in terms of streamlining our process and getting funding out the door quicker. And our support for the city's cultural community remains steadfast and high by historical standards. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about these figures, but first I'd like to provide a few updates on the work we're doing here at Cultural Affairs. Last month, Cultural Development Fund notifications went out to the field with $52.2 million going to support cultural programming at over 1,031 not-for-profits citywide. Due to the PEG, these notifications were delayed, and we recognize the major challenges this posed to many of the recipients. Our program officers are ready to answer questions any group might have, including handling scope changes due to the timing of notifications. Still distributing more than $50 million to the cultural sector despite the fiscal challenges is a major investment in this essential community of organizations and artists. I founded and led an organization that received funding from the CDF, and I know firsthand how big of a deal this is. The fiscal year 25 application process will be opening in just a few weeks, and we're looking to you, our partners in the City Council, to spread the word and help us recruit panelists that reflect the full breadth and diversity of our communities. So we are looking for the future council member David Carr, who have served on these panels before, to be able to promote and to get as many panelists as we possibly can for our upcoming process, and to let even more organizations in your district know about work at DCLA. City Canvas is an exciting that lines so many miles of New York Street. You might recall last July, Mayor Adams and the Department of Buildings announced Get Sheds Down, a sweeping new effort to remove these eyesores from city streets more quickly while redesigning and reimagining those that are needed. Make no mistake, we fully support the effort to get sheds down. We are here for it. But for the sheds that have to remain installed for safety reasons, we stand ready to transform them into platforms for creative expression that beautify our cityscape. Following a pilot version of the program that lasted several years, we launched the new Permanent City Canvas program last year. This new program, which I'm proud to say was created in part to legislation that I passed while serving on the council. It includes an open call for artists to design pre-approved artworks that they'll be able to choose from. The open call received hundreds of submissions from artists, and we look forward to announcing up to 10 selected designs later this spring. Staying in the realm of public art, our Percent for Art program recently turned 40. Yes, it's exciting. You can whoop whoop for that, yes? This program has had a transformative impact on the city's public spaces. Since it was established, more than 400 permanent public art projects have been completed. Another 100 plus commissions are in progress throughout the 5 boroughs. This administration understands the critical importance of public spaces to our city's health and vitality, and these spaces wouldn't be complete without the extraordinary artworks we've commissioned for them. And we've been happy to work with so many of you. We've had incredible conversations with Councilmember Williams and her district, because we want to make sure that public art is such a part of the vitality of working class communities all throughout the city. This program is one of the most critical ways that we invite artists to work with our communities to co-create our public realm together, and it gives real, meaningful financial support to artists in the process. Often a percent commission is just the first foray into public art. Hank Willis Thomas, for instance, designed the incredible Unity Monument in Brooklyn, a massive bronze arm that comes out of the medium on Tillery Street. This was the first public art commission, and now he has also created the monument to Coretta Scott King and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., recently unveiled in Boston Common. The very first Percent project completed in 1985 was artist Jorge Luis Rodriguez's Growth in the East Harlem Art Park. It stands tall there today, and it marks the first in a proud lineage. Soon, a monument to Shirley Chisholm will rise in Prospect Park, designed by the MacArthur-winning artists Amanda Williams and Olulekan Jafis, who won a major award at the Venice Architecture Biennale. So far, in recognition of the 40th anniversary, we've already had an installation on the steps of City Hall in celebration and hosted tours during Open House New York weekend. When I was in council, I was proud to support legislation that updated the Percent for Art formula for the first time since the program's inception. Law 22 of 2017 raised the cap per project from $400,000 to $900,000 and raised the annual cap for spending from $1.4 million to $4 million, allocating even more funding to create ambitious, exciting projects that can stand the test of time. Black History Month and now Women's Herstory Month provide great opportunities to remind us of the power of cultural programming to examine our past, come together in the present, and chart the course for a brighter future. Last month, you could visit the Black Future Festival at Brooklyn Children's Museum, explore the history of the Black Angels of Seaview Hospital at Staten Island Museum, participate in the Bronx Museum's James Baldwin Book Club, or hear Bass's Hillard Green present Milestone Negro Spirituals at the National Jazz Museum. This month, you can experience Jamaica Center for Arts and Learning's Strength, Courage, and Wisdom, a performance showcasing the range of women's voices and vocal expression on March 30th, or visit the Women's Work exhibition at the New York Historical Society. We are living through such a pivotal moment for our Black community and for the rights for women's equality all across New York City. Black leaders and institutions are reaching new heights of influence and investment, and I'm so proud to be a part of this. Just think of Studio Museum, Universal Hip Hop Museum, Afro-Latin Jazz Alliance, National Black Theater, Mokata, 651 Arts, La Mama, and so many more. These Black institutions, many of them founded and led by women, have all opened new and renovated spaces or will soon. We're proud of the city's investment in all of these spaces. Black culture, Black leadership, Black excellence are getting their long overdue credit, but it took generations of advocacy and investment to get to this point, and it's going to take generations more to continue building on the achievements we're witnessing before our eyes. The city alone has never been able to fully support all of our sector, even in the best financial circumstances. We need all levels of government to step up. We need private philanthropy to invest. We need our leaders across sectors to join boards and pledge their support. It took a village to get us here, and it's going to take the whole city to keep us moving forward. Just consider that Black residents are leaving New York in record numbers. We don't want these institutions to become tributes to past greatness. We want them to be anchors for living, vital communities. We need to invest in working New Yorkers, as the mayor is committed to doing, through affordable housing, through good jobs, and so much more. DCLA's capital program continues to pay dividends for New Yorkers. No other city in America provides this level of support for construction, equipment, renovation, and other hard costs like these. These sorts of projects can often be more difficult to raise funds for because, let's face it, HVAC isn't an exciting thing for a donor to put their names on. But these are essential investments that deliver world-class cultural infrastructure for New Yorkers. Just this year, we broke ground on a $13 million project for the Clemente, which will modernize their historic facility and install a new elevator that will make it accessible for people with disabilities. We cut the ribbon on a revamped education center at the Brooklyn Museum and a new performing arts space at the 92nd Street Y. The full renovation of the Nuyorican Poets Cafe will soon be underway, and projects at Downtown Art will also be complete. Along with the major renovation of La Mama, we cut the ribbon on last year. The arts community on East 4th Street is having a major moment that will ensure it continues to engage New Yorkers and attract audiences from all over the world for many years to come. And I was so excited to share that moment with Councilmember Rivera. Just a few blocks away, the Joyce is starting to welcome dancers to its new facility on 10th Street in the East Village. We're proud of the city's role in supporting these public-private partnerships. Art and culture is essential to New York City. They drive our economy and strengthen our communities. We're proud of the city's ongoing investment in the partnership with the cultural nonprofits that form the backbone of this essential sector. Despite the fiscal headwinds the city has been facing, we've done our best to make the necessary reductions in a way that would minimize impacts on our constituents. We're optimistic about the city's trajectory. With prudent financial management, we've been able to avoid another peg, and soon we'll be preparing to launch the fiscal year 25 CDF process. No one knows your districts better than you do. So we'll look to you to help spread the word about this opportunity to groups in your communities. We will provide toolkits and everything you need to make this happen. Thank you for the opportunity to present on the fiscal year 25 preliminary budget. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. I appreciate you, going through some of the places that you've been and that you've seen and that you've experienced with the local council members. A lot of that was done through negotiation by the council, through money allocated out of our discretionary funds and through consistent advocacy with the administration, but also because of the speaker. And a lot of that money now is included in sort of this pot, right? You have the council money, you have mayoral funds, And out of that pot of money, again, funds that were negotiated and for adoption, and out of that money that we worked so hard to try to produce, the administration has made cuts. It feels like theft. It feels like theft to the council members and to our work. And at the minimum, it's bad faith in terms of negotiations. So in that, we're very, very disappointed that it's come to this. I realize you mentioned a few tactics. We need private philanthropy to invest. But I think we all know that even if groups who could navigate what could be a very bureaucratic, difficult process, the money doesn't come in the door tomorrow. You know, some of these letters were received 8 months into the year. Correct. It doesn't work that way. And we have cultural organizations in crisis. You mentioned Fourth Arts Block. You mentioned some of the larger cultural institutions and groups. And it does feel personal to many. The Bronx Art Ensemble zeroed out. I mean, these are historically disenfranchised, underserved communities seeing $0 from the city. It's heartbreaking. So we saw that cultural institutions received a $21 million budget cut in the middle of this year. It's deep, it's devastating, it impacts organizations across the city and has implications for economic recovery. The city's cultural organizations are one of the city's economic engines, while improving the economy and that social impact piece, which I think is so important. So we've just started rebounding from COVID, and there are inflation costs. The administration imposes the devastating cuts. The organizations are already spread too thin. So now we have cut service hours, cut programs, cut jobs. We had the Staten Island Children's Museum closed for the entire month of January. That's just one example. There are so many. So with so many reasons not to cut funding for cultural institutions, why did the agency and the administration feel that these cuts were appropriate?
I thank you for putting this into context, and we too share many of the concerns that you just brought up. The challenge that every agency across this city faced were budget cuts. We had to make really tough decisions, and if you recall, there were several rounds of the PEG that the Department of Cultural Affairs was one of a few agencies that was not called in to participate in a cost savings plan. The city recognized the importance of the arts. They put their money where their beliefs were and made sure that this agency was kept whole. But because we were then facing, our city in particular was facing having to make good on the challenges that they were facing on a national level with a city budget. And so trying to come up with solutions, trying to come up with resources on a city level with a city budget that really required federal dollars and support put us in a very contentious, precarious, and unfortunate situation where we all, across all city agencies, had to make very difficult decisions. And we recognized that these very difficult decisions were going to impact many of our cultural institutions, but this was a place that we had to be in because of the financial crisis that we were facing. But I also want to say that the cultural community has been faced with so many things that cannot be understated in terms of not only were we faced with this federal crisis that required on so many levels federal support. During the pandemic, organizations many received federal stimulus funding. Federal stimulus funding dried up. Many of our private donors moved from New York City during that time. We also had a lot of challenges in the way of the pandemic and the recovery, and international tourism, particularly from Asia, has not rebounded, and many organizations are faced with the challenges of that. We also faced many challenges in terms of Many of the organizations have not been able to recover and bring their audiences back, which means that earned income is also down. One of the biggest challenges that organizations are facing at this time is that many foundations and corporations have changed their giving model and that they are no longer funding the arts. They have decided that they want to fund social justice initiatives, healthcare, climate, and all of these environmental issues are critically important to New York City and the world as a whole, but at the same time, we haven't been able to make the correlation between social justice, environment, and climate are the very issues that the art community is addressing, that they are tackling, that they are bringing forth discussion and solution in a very robust way. So there are a lot of things that are happening simultaneously at the same time that impacted the arts community that government can't solve for exclusively. There needs to be more opportunities and spaces and places for us to recognize that this artistic and cultural community is an ecosystem that every element of it has to be balanced with the other elements in terms of private, foundation, corporations, individuals, government, federal, state, city. Everyone has to work collectively, and we're starting to see a shift in that, and we need to continue to bring those resources together.
I would only say that it's very hard to hear that you have philanthropy not quite there. I mean, I think no one understands it better than these organizations. It's like Mellon and New York Community Trust are not going to solve everyone's issues and their challenges. And you mentioned tourism, and I feel that tourism and the drive to get people here from whatever country at whatever pace that we're at is almost exclusively driven by these organizations and these groups. So, I mean, this is a 99-to-1 return on the dollars into these cultural institutions and groups, and that's the part that I can't quite figure out what math is coming out of the administration. And since the January plan was released, the economic outlook for the city has improved greatly, and the mayor announced the additional cuts that were planned for April would not go through. We were all happy about that. However, as you can imagine, damage is already done and devastating. Have there been any discussions about restoring the cuts to culture, especially in light of their economic impact?
This is a daily conversation, if it's not hourly, in terms of what we can do to restore the PEG exercises from November and January. We are in conversations with OMB. We continue to have discussions. We continue to put forward many of the ideas and proposals and the information that you just shared in terms of the rate of return on cultural institutions to the city of New York. And so those conversations have been going well. We continue to be in negotiation. The opportunity to make sure that the upcoming PEG doesn't happen was the successful effort of all of us in terms of making sure that we are on stable financial footing. But again, the conversations in terms of restoring past PEGs is a conversation that we continue to have, that many agencies still continue to have. We're hearing from the field, we're hearing conversations from our federal and state colleagues in terms of the importance of this, and we're going to continue to stay in negotiations and close communication with OMB.
So the PEGs for fiscal year 2025 and the out years are being reconsidered?
All of that is being reconsidered, all of that is being negotiated, all of that is being discussed. And I would say that we are in such challenging financial times at this point that while they're being discussed, while they're being negotiated, factors continue to change and shift. And so this will be an ever-evolving conversation. This is always going to be something that we're going to be discussing. Negotiations will always be ongoing because of the uncertainty of the fiscal climate at this time.
So the DCLA funding goes towards agency staff, but directly supports nonprofit cultural institutions throughout the city. Many of them are here actually to testify. And of course, we encourage you to hear public testimony. How many organizations were impacted by the PEGs? And can you explain to us how the PEGs were calculated and implemented for the cultural institutions group in both November and January?
I would say that almost every organization that we fund was impacted by the PEG, so that the amount of funding that we had decreased. And so because of the amount of funding that decreased, every element of our agency had to have some level of a decrease. What we tried to do was to do that on a tiered basis so that the impacts would not be felt so harshly on any one organization, but it was a very challenging process when you have less dollars and less resources. You have to make very tough decisions, but you try to do that in a way where the impact is not felt so remarkably on any one institution.
Do you know how many?
We fund over 1,031 organizations. So all of those organizations received some element of a reduction.
Can you explain how the PEGs were calculated and implemented for the SIGS group in both November and January?
I'm going to turn it over to Lance, who's going to answer those questions, our general counsel.
Councilmember, there were two different approaches for the November PEG exercise and for the January PEG exercise. The goal of the agency was to achieve equity. And so we implemented different strategies. And in some cases, it was an across-the-board cut of the same percentage to all of the CIGs. And in others, it was a more tiered approach to make sure to acknowledge the impact that would that a PEG exercise would have on smaller organizations. So we experimented with both, keeping in mind the sacrifice that larger organizations at some points were playing with cap swaps and cuts at adoption against the inequity of all groups receiving the same cut.
That somewhat explains the strategy. So you try to look at equity, that's clear by what you said, but you try to see the impact it would have. I'm trying to understand your two different approaches and strategies. Was there any analysis about how these cuts would impact individual institutions and their ability to absorb these cuts?
We didn't really look at individual organizations, let's say when we're looking at the cultural institution groups, right? Because the thought process there is that every organization has its own dynamics. They're totally different institutions, from zoos to parks to botanic gardens, so it's very difficult to look at them individually. What we tried to look at them as were by economic budget size. And so we looked at some of the smaller organizations that are part of the cultural institution groups, some of the mid-size organizations, and the larger institutions, and making decisions in terms of how could we surgically do this in a way that would allow essentially these organizations to see another day, right? So we sort of looked at it in that way in terms of like, how can some of these institutions survive during this PEG exercise, but then also looking at the CDF process, and the CDF process functions differently because it's a panel review process. So even in the panel review process, some organizations do have an opportunity to fare better than they did the previous year, but even with that, they're still working from a place of a reduced amount of funding for grants as a whole. So many of those organizations during the CDF process, some organizations saw an increase, some stayed right where they were, and some saw a decrease, and as you have stated before, some were zeroed out, not because of a lack of resources, but more so because of how they scored during the panel review process.
But was there any analysis of how these cuts might affect ticket prices, admission fees, or other accessibility and equity measurements?
We didn't have the ability to make those decisions in that way, primarily because of the expediency in which you have to respond to the PEG exercises. The type of analysis that you're looking at would take some sort of outside firm to do a review and analysis and to make recommendations and to understand how the field works and how all of these institutions would be impacted. We simply didn't have those resources and tools at our disposal, and we had to make very significant cuts to meet those target goals. And I'm sure even with that level of analysis, there would be organizations throughout this process that would be hurt through this process. What we are proud of is that 76% of the organizations that applied to the Department of Cultural Affairs did receive an award. So 76% of those organizations received an award, which continues to make us the largest cultural funder in the United States of America, above that of even the National Endowment for the Arts, which is the national funder for all of the United States. We still allocate more resources because this city recognizes the power of art and culture, and this mayor has established, particularly during the first 2 budget cycles, his deep appreciation and understanding of the power of the arts.
I agree that at some point an organization might feel hurt, but it just feels like a very careless and destructive way of implementing blunt cuts instead of meaningful analysis on the city's economic outlook and revenue, which is what the administration continues to tout as sort of their metric as to how we rebound from what has been a very debilitating last couple of years. So let me just move on to the CDF. So not only does DCLA provide funding to SIGs, but also to smaller organizations through the Cultural Development Fund. Can you explain the impact of the PEGs on CDF recipients and how these decisions were made? And just to break that down for you, how many of the CDF awardees received reduced funding when compared to the previous year? How many CDF awardees were new recipients? How many organizations who had received grant funding in the previous year did not receive funding in the current cycle? And can you provide us with a list of these organizations?
All of the organizations that we funded received less funding through the CDF process because we had to account for about a $4 million reduction to the CDF process. While I'm continuing to answer this question, I'll also bring forward Andrea Louis, who is the CDF Assistant Commissioner for the Programs Unit, and she can delve more into the specific numbers that you brought forward, and committee counsel can swear her in as well. And so during this process, we basically made decisions based off of the panel decision in terms of what they allocated in terms of the scoring, and the scoring determined how much resources organizations would be able to receive through this process. So it's really a panel review process that determines how much funding each organization receives each year.
Hi, please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions? I do. Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you, council member. So as the commissioner said, we were able to fund 75% of eligible applicants. I do not have the number for you of the exact number of organizations that received less funding at this time, but we can get back to you on those precise figures.
If you can provide us with a breakdown on who received funding in fiscal year 2024, how much they received, and how much each organization was cut, we would greatly appreciate that as soon as possible.
Okay.
So you mentioned the panel. I'm glad that you mentioned the process. We've received a lot of concerns over how the panels were conducted this year. Can you briefly describe the panel process for determining recipients? Have there been any changes made recently to the panel review process? For example, reducing the number of days or the number of panelists or representation from other branches of government like city council and the borough presidents, and why were these changes made? So if you can describe it and the changes, I would appreciate that.
Okay. Thank you for that question. There have not been appreciable changes to the panel review process for FY24 compared to FY23.
No changes.
There were some changes, but not appreciably different ones. One thing that we were able to do was we added a round of discussion during the panel review process so that panelists could rediscuss the scoring of the individual applications following the initial discussion.
How many of the panelists were new? What type of training was provided to them? Does DCLA have adequate staff to run the panel successfully?
Yes, well, we always welcome new staff, and I know that we'll be welcoming new staff to the agency shortly, which is very much appreciated. Last year for FY24, we had conducted 35 panels, and each of those were co-facilitated by 2 staff members. In addition, there was a note taker and a production manager who was present for those. Each panel had 5 panelists scheduled for that conversation, and each panelist was instructed to either attend an in-person virtual webinar, or if they could not attend, to view it after the fact. It was recorded and made available to them. There were also robust training materials, and as part of those instructions, each panelist was instructed to review the full deck of the applications, approximately 20 applications, at home during their own time. I should say that we were pleased to be able to increase the amount of the panelist honorarium to pay for the individual's time to participate. The panelists then spent approximately 8 or more hours reviewing the applications at home, and then came together for a virtual discussion on one day. Prior to the pandemic, the panels did take place over, on average, 1 to 2 days, and for a very large panel, there was an occasional third day of discussion, or partial third day of discussion, but that was definitely on the rare side.
Right, those are the changes also that I was alluding to, because it wasn't last year, but maybe 2 years ago, there have been changes.
That change did not take place for beginning in fiscal year 24. That is correct.
But before that?
Yes, they did. And that was also in part due to feedback that we had gotten from the field. When there were multi-day in-person panels, especially for smaller organizations, that can be quite a burden on staff members to have to take time away from their regular positions, or if individual artists are doing that, for them to take that time away. So we wanted to make it a more equitable process, and also one that was more in other words, we wanted to be able to open the door to allow for greater participation. And so in doing so, we have it now as a one-day virtual process.
You want to maximize participation by limiting the time that you, you're going to hear from many organizations as to what they think would be a more efficient way to run the panel process, starting with better communication on expectations. I think that's going to be something that's underlined over and over and over again. I just want to recognize we've been joined by Councilmember Brewer as well. And I would like to go to my colleagues for questions. We can start with Councilmember Carr.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, always good to see you, although with you and Lance sitting there, I really expect to see you sitting behind us in your old chair, but always a pleasure. I want to piggyback off what the Chair was asking about the CDF panel funding, and you know that this is a matter of great concern to me over the last 2 years, which is that the changes that predated you, right, that came into effect as you were becoming the commissioner, the removal of the political representation, the council delegation, the borough president, the elimination of the borough base structure that predated fiscal year 23 has created outcomes that are always going to be iniquitous from a borough perspective. And that's really what we've been seeing since fiscal year 23. And to your credit, you used the budget that you had to mitigate those negative externalities while you could, but now we're in a tough budget scenario. Right. And what I hear from CDF panel applicants locally is that they're being zeroed out, not just cut. And while there are some groups in the past that had told me there were issues, that now are happy with their grant this year, and that's to be expected. Not everybody's application is the same every year. but the outcomes are uneven, even internally to the borough that I represent. And so, given that structurally we're always going to have, in my view, these iniquitous outcomes, and these so-called reforms predate your tenure, why are we still experimenting with them? Why don't we go back to a model that worked and that was fair across the board, and then tinker with that base model to make sure that everyone has accessibility like you're claiming you'd like to get?
I thank you so much for that question. I would say that, as you stated, the implementations of the reforms came at the very moment that I was coming into this position. And so many of the ideas or the way that things used to operate are things that we are considering, because at the end of the day, the reforms are a living process. It was a model, and it is a model that is an evolution and a continuous work in process. I share many of the concerns that you've brought up, and I understand the challenges that many organizations have faced as a result of how the reforms have been implemented, but it's an ever-breathing, ever-growing, ever-evolving process. Your testimony helps in many ways for us to understand what you're hearing on the ground in your community, and we're taking all of this information back because our agency is very open to hearing feedback from the field, especially. Our agency is very in tune with hearing feedback from the field, and we want to be able to take that information back and continue to create a better process, to create a process that's more accountable to the communities that we serve in New York City. And I want you to know that much of what you are speaking about is much of what we're speaking about internally within the agency, and we're looking for ways to continue to see how the reforms have functioned and operated, but at the same time, we don't want to just throw the baby out with the bathwater at the same time, in terms of saying we've implemented something, and there are some really good things that have come out of that implementation, from raising the floor from $5,000 to $10,000. Previously, organizations would put together a proposal and they might come away with $5,000, but it might have cost $5,000 in staff time to write the grant and to provide the final report and all of that dynamic. So we raised the floor from $5,000 to $10,000. In the last fiscal year, we funded 125 new organizations, and that's what the field said. They wanted to see more organizations funded and not the same organizations funded over and over again. And they also said that they wanted to make sure that organizations had multi-year grants. So those are really good, positive things. But when you raise the floor from 5 to 10,000, you fund over 100 new organizations, it creates a more competitive field, and there are more organizations competing for funding than ever before. So it's all of these challenges in terms of how do we find the middle road to so much of what's happening and the change and the dynamics that are happening in the cultural field. Organizations are being founded and created. They're coming into their own. If you just look at the organization that I founded 25 years ago, it's now a full-grown organization moving into a brand new building. So it's like they're going to be commanding their share of the cultural pie. So it's all of these dynamics that we're looking at in terms of how do we create a fairer, better, more equitable process, and our agency is completely invested in doing that work to get to that point that will continue to evolve and change once we get to that pivotal point.
Understood, Chair. If I could have a brief follow-up, with your permission. I hear everything that you're saying, and I agree that it's always going to be an ongoing process, but I think that we actually have to try to get it right for the coming fiscal year, because we've had 3 fiscal years now with this process, and I think that we need to make sure that we correct some of the kinks in this process, because the issue is that it's been bad and uneven for 3 fiscal years, and but for the budget infusion you had in FY23, it would have been bad from the get-go. And so I think that the other thing that we have to focus on is, and you mentioned, getting more panelists, and I'm happy to advertise that at that time. But I think the other part is, when I participated as a staffer for my predecessor, every year I would look at applications from groups that I'm very familiar with from my work, and they were not great. And they needed to be told that, and they needed some troubleshooting. And every year we would ask your predecessor if the agency could help and do a workshop with that before next year's panelists were convened. And the answer was always, well, maybe. And I think that's something else the agency has to do, is that if we're going to say, well, we don't want the same groups getting funding year after year, and we don't want this to be a stale list, let's also make sure that they're not submitting the same bad application over and over again, and that we do what we can to help them, because most of these groups are all volunteer organizations. They're not necessarily paid, particularly for the communities that I represent.
I want to say you are exactly on point with where you are. I would say that there's a bit of a rubber meeting the road moment that needs to happen in terms of we have to do more to promote to organizations that we do very intensive webinars prior to the application becoming live, and even once it becomes alive. And the program officers at the Department of Cultural Affairs are the best in terms of taking that time to walk applicants through that process in terms of where they could do more in order to make their application more competitive. So that process does exist. What you're talking about is something more granular in terms of, you know, these organizations, they live next door to you, you know them from elementary school, you see them at the bus stop, you can say, hey, so-and-so, I read your application and it really wasn't good, man. You gotta do something to fix this. Like, come into the office, we don't have that level yet, but what you're talking about in terms of how the old process was, the old process married with a newer process, somewhere in the middle, getting to that point is where we need to be, where those conversations at the bus stop, in the supermarket, at the barbershop can happen because you know all of these groups, but also on our end, making it more known to the organizations that you do have the ability to pick up the phone and have a program officer speak directly to you. You do have the ability to come on our webinar and ask substantial questions about how to improve your application. Did you want to share something?
Yeah, no, I wanted to just add to everything the commissioner's already said. Councilmember Carr, some of these devices are already available, and maybe part of what we need is to partner with the council to make sure that the word gets out to all applicants to the CDF process about how to make sure that they get exactly the type of conversation you're suggesting. In addition to the webinars that we do during the application process, every applicant, successful and not successful, gets an email from the Department of Cultural Affairs after the awards are announced, inviting them to sign up for something called a feedback call. So every group, all 1,300 applicants, are invited to sign up for feedback so that they can hear exactly what went wrong or what went right with their application in that particular year. Beyond feedback calls, there are also advice calls. And so one of the best pieces of feedback that I think our agency could give is, if you are one of the applicants to the Cultural Development Fund, please get to know and reach out to your assigned program officer. That's going to be the expert who's going to help guide you through the process, take a look at what happened in your FY24 application, and give you the advice you need to be as successful as possible in FY25.
Thank you, Chair.
Did you want to add? Oh, yes, I was just going to say, we've already set up the calendar for this year's webinars as well as office hours, so we'd be happy to share that with council after this
Appreciated.
hearing.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
We appreciate your getting the word out. Thank you.
I appreciate the competitiveness and you mentioning the growth. I think you're talking about more groups, more growth, more need, and yet you're implementing the cuts. It just seems a bit out of place. Without council members, borough president, representatives, there's no oversight of these panels, and we can't tell if the panels are as rigorous or as inclusive as they previously were. And I'm sure you'll hear that from many groups in terms of feedback. So we're going to go to Council Member Hudson for questions, followed by Lewis.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Commissioner.
Good afternoon.
Since its founding in 2016, CUNY Cultural Corps has connected more than 1,070 students with paid internships in New York City's cultural sector in partnership with DCLA, including 169 students who are currently participating in FY24. Cultural Corps participants represent the diversity of New York City. Since 2016, 78% identified as non-white, 33% identify as Latinx, and 23% identify as LGBTQIA+. Each year, approximately 80 of New York City's cultural institutions, including MoMA, Museo del Barrio, Little Island, and Jazz at Lincoln Center, benefit from access to CUNY student talent, expertise, and assets during the internship. Partner organizations then have connections to strong candidates for job openings because 80% of CUNY students stay in New York City after graduation. The result is a cultural institution workforce that better reflects New York City and ultimately a more inclusive cultural sector. According to a 2023 alumni survey, 60% of respondents reported they're working or had worked in the cultural sector after their internship. Can you share what plans the city has to continue to support this essential pipeline for a diverse and thriving cultural sector?
Thank you so much for that question. CUNY Cultural Corps is certainly a program that I believe very strongly in. Internships are why I am here today. I was able to intern at the Brooklyn Children's Museum, the Brooklyn Museum, the Met, and many others in order to get to this place right here as the Commissioner of Cultural Affairs. So during this budget cycle, again, we had to make very difficult decisions to implement the PEG, and we had to pause the CUNY Cultural Corps for fiscal year 24. We are hoping to restore it next year. We are going to fight to make sure that the CUNY Cultural Corps is part of this administration. It's a strong point to the work that we're doing in New York City in terms of building the cultural leaders of tomorrow. And this is one of those programs that is just, it exemplifies everything that we believe in New York City in terms of training the next generation. But I want to say it was one of the hardest decisions to pause this program. And to anyone here, you know, as Mayor Eric Adams says and asks us, do you really think that this is the budget that I wanted for the city of New York? This is absolutely not the budget that Mayor Eric Adams wanted to implement for the city of New York, but he had to make very tough decisions, and thereby we had to make very tough decisions. And CUNY Cultural Corp is something that we want to see come back. It's something that we're going to fight to make come back, because the future, all of us, are essentially in this CUNY Cultural Corp. So we want to make sure that it comes back.
And just to clarify, are you having conversations with OMB about bringing it back?
Oh, certainly. I mean, this is at like the top of the list in terms of it's not a significant amount of funding, and we want to make sure that this amount of funding does come back in the negotiations. So we are negotiating, we are fighting hard for CUNY Cultural Corps, and we are certainly making sure that it's part of the negotiation process in a very robust way.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Lewis?
Thank you, Chair. Good to see you, Commissioner.
Always good to see you.
3 quick questions. I wanted to know if you could talk to us a little bit about the impact of tourism. So I wanted to know, how does DCLA measure the impact of tourism on the city's cultural institutions, and which boroughs see the greatest amount of visitors when it comes to tourism? I also wanted to ask, what metrics are used for DCLA in measuring which organizations will be qualified for funding? And it's based off of the competitiveness conversation you just had with the chair, because what I often see is organizations for the first time get funding, and some organizations that have been doing work for a long time don't get access, and it may be that their application is not viable. But it would be great to know what metrics are being used so that we could further support those organizations that we think would be the best qualified. And the last question is in regards to the upcoming application. I spent maybe 3 hours of my time looking for a program officer when our application was the deadline was up, just to make sure I had the dates right. So the website had the incorrect information, and I went in my phone and found an old staffer of yours that was able to connect with someone else. But it would be good to know, like, who's the best person to contact so that we're prepared for that time to provide the information. Thank you.
I'll start with tourism. NYC & Co. has been our go-to in terms of understanding the metrics and the numbers of the impact of tourism. We know that tourism generates over $110 billion in New York City, and it is certainly the lifeline on so many levels. We haven't had a more recent breakdown of the impact of tourism in that way since the pandemic. The Controller's Office has often done those types of assessments. We don't have the most recent numbers, and we should get a breakdown breakdown in an upcoming assessment in terms of where each borough places in terms of the amount of revenue that they bring for the city of New York. So we can definitely get that number for you. In terms of I understand in terms of what you're saying as far as viable applications, and Andrea can talk a bit more about that. There is an assessment internally that are part of our guidelines that explains to each applicant how they can get funded through this process. And we want to make sure that organizations understand those guidelines and where they need to put more emphasis in terms of explaining what it is that they do and the outcomes and the deliverables of their programs. You know, we want to make sure that organizations are doing, of course, quality programming and that it's reaching diverse audiences and that they have individuals from their community that are reflective of the organization, that are working, that are providing services for. So there are multiple points in terms of how organizations can show the very best of what they do and who they're reaching. And what we do essentially is that organizations, through the panelists, are given points, or they score a certain amount of points. Those points, based off of the points that they scored and the amount of funding that we have, come together to determine how we will award grants. But Andrea can speak a little bit more about the nature of that process.
Sure, thank you, and thank you for that question. The guidelines are on our website, as the Commissioner mentioned, and are very clearly listed throughout the application process as well. There are 3 criteria by which the applications are reviewed, and that is service to the field, organizational accountability, and quality. And as I mentioned, those are sort of described in much greater detail, both in the guidelines as well as also in the application. I should say that also we do provide worksheets for the written portion of the application as well as the budget, so that organizations can prepare their responses well in advance. And then also that material is also available through our Salesforce platform when they actually log in to input their responses. And
Right.
if I may answer your final question,
Yes.
if anyone has a question about who their program officer is or would like to speak to someone, the email address is cdfhelpdesk@culture.nyc.gov.
It will be good to have a contact that we can speak to as council members.
Oh, okay, very
We could
good.
also email the help desk.
You can email me.
Not a problem, but
Okay.
if you could give us a
Yes.
point of contact, that would
Of
be
course.
helpful. It's also helpful that, so the guidelines are online, folks see that. The issue is the scorecard, right? So making sure that the application is really viable, so they could definitely check all the boxes.
Yes, that's right.
But is the application vibrant? And I think that's what the commissioner just shared, finding a way to sit with folks and making sure that the application actually looks exactly like what the guidelines are expecting.
That's right. And then the percentage that each of the categories is weighted is also noted clearly on the guidelines as well.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to, and it's been in my mind, but I want to further talk with you and explore, because you passed the legislation for the not-for-profit offices of support. What is the correct title for it?
The Mayor's Office of Nonprofit Services, which we would help with applications like these.
So we should figure out a way to connect so that the not-for-profit support office that you've created holds the Department of Cultural Affairs and those types of not-for-profits as part of that service, and how can we build out that office to have more of those levels of support and touch points, because they really shouldn't be seen as separate, because not-for-profit art organizations are clearly part of the not-for-profit field of New York City. So we should meet shortly after this to discuss that. Mm-hmm. And congratulations on passing that legislation.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I know after Councilmember Brewer, I certainly have questions about the issues that the nonprofits are facing with the CDF letters that have headcount, capital projects. But first, let's go to Councilmember Brewer.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So a couple of things. On the economic development. So I obviously represent on the Upper West Side some very large institutions that bring tourism. So I actually feel whether it's the Met or the Natural History, they all need to have full funding, even though they're large, because they've already gone into their endowment quite a bit given this pandemic. So my question is, in terms of, I know the controller hasn't done a tourism so-called economic impact for the arts, and they really should be doing it because we haven't had one for a very long time. Port Authority used to do it. So between the Port Authority or the controller, somebody needs to do it. So my question is, do we have any sense of closing the American Museum or canceling shows at the Met or whatever? What kind of an impact? Because that's what's going to happen if these horrible budget cuts go through in terms of tourism and economic development. Do you have a sense of that, or you have none because there's no study?
Currently, there is no study for us to make a comparison, but at the same time, living on the edge in that way, we are trying to do everything in terms of negotiating with OMB to have the restoration of those pegs restored so that we don't have to answer that question at this time. So we are in robust conversations. Nothing has been decided at this time, but we want to make sure that those organizations, I shared with you the opening of the Gilder Center, shared in the enthusiasm of seeing Dr. Sean Decatur, the first African-American man to hold that position at the Museum of Natural History, really making Black History Month quite a celebration. We want to make sure that these organizations are doing well. We want to make sure that they have the budgets that they need to perform at the level that they need to perform at because of the level of tourism that is so viable to New York City. So we're continuing to engage in conversations, continuing to engage in negotiations, share your enthusiasm, and recognize the importance of these institutions.
Okay, I appreciate that. I wish that the mayor, I know he goes to the events, but I wish that the mayor would also understand that. So I'm just reiterating, agreeing, and feel very strongly that these organizations are the backbone for our economy in so many different ways. Young People's Chorus also got a cut, my God. I mean, if there's another organization like that, I haven't met them. So these are examples where I know you're arguing, we are too. Do not cut either capital or expense. You've got the same capital problem. The Met can't live without certain technology that, when we give them money, it's not for fun, even though they're large, it's because they need a new system for the largest opera in the world. And they need that. It's not fluff. So I just want to emphasize that. Other quick question, which is not on the list, is arts education. Kate Levin used to make sure that there was a blue book that said, okay, arts education, maybe you're doing literacy and maybe you're doing math, but of course I believe you can't do that without music. That's my impression. So are we doing any analysis of what arts education includes in the school system? Because with all due respect to the principals, and I understand this is not high on their priority. I know too many schools that don't have any music. So is that something that's on your agenda?
That is exactly something that's on our agenda. We are working with Mr. Paul Thompson, who is at the Department of Education, and he is really their arts facilitator for the entire city of New York. We have many conversations. They just put out what would be perceived as their own blueprint, showing the metrics of where they are and where they want to be in terms of having arts education on every level from elementary, junior high school, and high school. We can get you a copy of that new report that they just issued. We had an incredible celebration showing where we are, where we want to be, and where we want to take the arts in terms of New York City into every single classroom. As you know, I have a 6-year-old, and I have seen some of those challenges that you speak of when you're trying to find a school that has arts education for our students, and every child should have that. And we're going to continue to work with DOE on that goal.
So is that a new need, or is that something that is got data and money associated with it?
Now, I don't know how they did it under Kate Levin when she was at the Department of Cultural Affairs, but that falls, those reports and those metrics, that falls under the Department of Education. So their budget would have to expand in order to provide that level of education and support. You can add on
But
to
they're
it.
already doing it. We will get you a copy of the report. It's
I
incredibly comprehensive.
love to read the report, but the issue for me is, with all due respect, on the ground, I know for a fact that, I mean, I know Manhattan. I don't know the other boroughs, as you know, but I know Manhattan, arts education is not what it should be, and here we are, the capital of arts in the world. So it takes money, but without it, you have no more audiences, and you obviously don't have a rounded student. So I'm saying, if it's got to be in every single school in a quality way. So I'd like to, if you don't have arts, if you don't have it mandated, and if you don't have data, and if you don't have somebody paying attention, then it's not going to happen. Because I understand you're a principal, you got other challenges that you have to address. So we're not doing enough on arts education. That's what I'm saying. And it's one administration. So DOE has to work with you. You got to work with DOE, et cetera. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Brewer.
Absolutely. I would just say the arts and education, I mean, that has to happen. And then the services and the programs that we depend on in the schools and even beyond the schools, in our senior centers and nursing homes and everywhere else, that is made possible by the revenue generated by these very groups. So it's actually a cycle that should continue with the support of the city. And without it, without supporting these groups, it just goes, it affects so many different critical components, especially when it comes to supporting our communities that need it the most. And that's the piece I'm really trying to understand. So for the groups that are CDF recipients, and I thank Councilmember Brewer for mentioning the larger institutions that provide so much programming you don't even see. The American Museum of Natural History, it's not just dinosaur bones. I mean, they're training teachers and professors and their children in classrooms, learning and seeing and feeling all types of important and incredible lessons. For the CDF recipients, that was such, I just to say, it was a very botched process. They not only faced steep cuts to their budgets, but they only learned about their funding in February, which was 8 months into the fiscal year. This delay, as you can imagine, is incredibly destabilizing for organizations who need to schedule and plan programming in advance, and many who already actually implemented this programming, there's no doubt. Many either received a cut for programming they have already hired for, or learned they were funded to do a program they now can't do. Can you explain the reason for the delay in announcements? What steps are you taking to prevent delayed awards letters again?
Absolutely, Councilmember Rivera. So to explain the delay in funding, it simply was about the PEG cut. And the way that we allocate funding, there is a formula applied based on the score that each group receives from the panelists. That formula is very complicated, and then once we ran it, we were able to give out awards to 1,031 groups. When we didn't know how much funding we would have, it doesn't impact just a few groups, it impacts the formula that applies to all of the recipients, all 1,031. So until we knew exactly how much money we were going to have for the CDF program, it was very difficult to give out awards. As soon as we had the award, the total amount for the CDF program, which was in mid to late January, we promptly distributed awards at the beginning of February. This is an impact of the PEG cut. We're deeply hopeful that the sacrifices that all agencies made collectively to get a better handle and a stronger financial picture for the City of New York will mean that there won't be future PEG cuts in FY25, and we can get back to the more steady schedule that we have had for many years of giving out awards in about November. And with any luck, we would hope to accelerate that timeline, but we have been pretty stable about making announcements in November, which is our target for FY25.
I mean, we're in the council looking for a way to be inclusive about codifying this process. Just, we understand, and I believe that this panel cares about the work, but something like that, That was just unacceptable. It's indefensible. I can't imagine running an organization and in February you get this news. And I know a lot of it depends on the score and the panel, but I mean, you had long-standing organizations that were funded for a very, very long time, like the Bronx Arts Ensemble. And I know they didn't write a bad application. They got cuts due to the panel score. I think the process is flawed and needs fixing. I believe that there's a coalition here, at least, and many artists and organizations that submitted a list of suggested reforms last year. So we hope that those are taken into consideration. And again, we're looking to memorialize it. So in terms of the capital projects as well, because we're also seeing, and I know Councilmember Brewer has been such a great advocate for the organizations in her district who are seeing their capital projects pause as well. So this is programmatic interruptions, and then you have capital projects that are already underway, planned, for capacity. So how many active capital projects does the agency currently have?
We can get you that number, the exact number, but if you have another follow-up question to the Capitol, we can go into that while we're getting you that exact number.
Sure, okay. Do you believe that the preliminary capital commitment plan accurately accounts for the current and future capital needs of the city's cultural institutions? Are there any capital programs and projects that may be under budgeted or not yet included in the current plan? And are there any capital projects that have been cut or pushed out of the capital commitment plan?
The challenge, again, with this entire process is having to make really tough decisions with less funding. And so there are projects that are happening that we are state mandated to do, from the borough-based jails to the BQE project, and many others that are having huge implications on the amount of funding that we are able to spend on capital projects in New York City, also given the challenges of the budget at this time. So many projects that we want to see implemented have been paused. We also had to make cuts to our capital budget, so some projects have been paused. Some have had to have been cut, but those projects that we cut were projects that inevitably we made those decisions because there were things that those projects that made them ineligible for funding. Things that we might have done 10 years ago, we don't do now, such as, let's say, acquisition. So some organizations might have been allocated funding for acquisition, and the agency does not provide funding for acquisition. So organizations such as that, maybe some organizations were allocated capital dollars 10 years ago, and they have not moved that project forward because during that time, they couldn't find other foundation, corporate, or individual partners to advance that project. But what we have told all of those organizations that found their projects to be ineligible, reapply in the next fiscal year, come forward with a project that can be capitally funded and supported, and we would happily review that project and to see if there's any way we can get those projects over the finish line. We want to see projects get over the finish line. That's essentially what our agency does, and that's essentially tied to the viability of the city, and we want to see that level of support. So if organizations did not receive or their budget was actually cut out of this capital process, please apply again.
Well, we know there have been capital projects that have been cut or pushed out of the capital commitment plan. I wanted to hear from you all as to sort of the decision-making process. I mean, the administration has been moving projects into the out years or canceling them altogether under the assumption that the city is nearing its debt capacity. And with the governor including the TFA debt limit increase as part of her executive budget proposal, do you believe that the capital commitment plan can now be readjusted to move projects back into the first years of the plan and to recommit or restore projects that had been canceled?
That's certainly a part of the negotiation process. That's what these conversations are about in terms of new information that wasn't provided to us previously, and now this information is apparent and visible, and how do we then take this information and readjust it so that the capital projects that were put on hold, that we now have a pathway to get there. It's just interesting in terms of when this particular hearing took place, that we are probably at the pinnacle of these discussions in terms of really understanding how we're going to move forward as a city, how we're going to move forward as an agency, and how we're going to get these projects over the finish line. I mean, we want to see this happen. This is essentially what is the viability of the city. And for me, I take getting capital projects over the finish line so personal because I've gone through that process, but I also understand taking it from the administrative lens, taking it from, the agency lens, and all of these different, bureaucratic processes. Essentially what you have in your hands as a commissioner is you have the ability, you're holding people's dreams in your hands. And it's your goal and job and desire to have those dreams become realized. So it's a lot of pressure on a day-to-day basis to figure out, how do I make all of these aspirations and dreams come true that many, as I faced as myself, are founders, and they've put their blood, sweat, and tears and their entire lives into these projects, and it's really important to figure out how to get them over the finish line. So we take that role and job very seriously, and we're continuing to be in the negotiation process with OMB to figure out how do we in fact do that.
I just want to second what the chair said, because the governor put, I think, $6 million in terms of raising the debt limit, and I can promise you, I bet they'll do that at least in the state legislature, if not more, right? Mm-hmm. And Mr. OMB sat here and said the same thing, BQE jails, and I think it threw in the subway. Come on, there's no question that there's enough for your agencies to be able to get their capital. So when I hear from the Met and I hear from Lincoln Center and others, I say, with all due respect, just, you're going to get your money, your capital money, right? So, but then you tell them, with all due respect, to go and apply for something else. I say, you can apply for something else, but you're going to get your money, your capital money, because we're going to fight for it. So it's just a little bit of a mixed message coming from you and from us. Maybe I think what you should say to people is, I know you can't counter OMB. They're like the elephant in the room. But you could at least tell them that there's money coming in terms of ceiling in Albany, because I think that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. I know that's going to happen. So the capital projects they're so, as you say, they're so important. They're jobs, they're the future, they're the economic development. And particularly for your agency, they're incredibly important. So
we are going to fight.
Tell them something off the record and on the record, Commissioner. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And yes, the off the record conversations are far more interesting than the hearing conversations. But we want to make sure, and I just want to be clear, we can only fund projects that are eligible. And so there are certain dynamics that we have to adhere to, but we do want to make sure that organizations that did receive cuts because their projects weren't eligible, they absolutely have an opportunity to reapply for that funding. And just to Chair Carlina, we have 408 active capital projects.
But the ones I'm talking about were eligible originally, just so you know.
Totally. Then those will definitely be looked at.
Thank you for the number. I mean, you mentioned in your testimony, Nuyorican, Downtown Art, Teatro Círculo, La Mama. I mean, these are the Joyce. These are all in my district, which I appreciate your personal touch there. But absolutely my priority, because they needed their capacity expanded. There was no
That's
question. Right. They're critical. And so whether it's, Downtown Art, Lincoln Center, I mean, these are places that are lifelines for our communities, our young people especially, because I've personally witnessed that on Fourth Arts Block. So thank you, Councilmember Brewer, for your addition to that, because we feel with OMB and your organization, we're trying to at least have some sort of collaboration on messaging on what we need from different levels of government. But truly, the city, we have to do better, and so does DCLA. So the department's fiscal 2025 preliminary budget provides for 60 full-time positions across all divisions, an increase of 2 compared to the head count at the fiscal 2024 adopted budget. Does the agency have adequate headcount to meet the needs of the cultural organizations and effectively run all the programs and initiatives?
Well, I want to, and Lance will take up the rest of this question, but I want to say one of the things that I'm really excited about that happened out of this process was that we were able to take the hiring freeze. So during all of these negotiations, we had a hiring freeze. The hiring freeze has been lifted. We now are able to hire for so many positions. We are actively interviewing for 3 positions right in the programs unit. And there are many other units throughout our agency where we are interviewing. We are now able to hire so that we can meet the needs of the communities, and we can get our capital process more streamlined when we have the level of expertise and positions filled, as well as through the CDF process. We're in that process of negotiations. Did you want to add to that? And we can always do more with more.
You're preaching to the choir on that one, but 3 positions being interviewed for right now. So do you think you have adequate headcount?
We have adequate headcount now. Once those positions are filled, our agency will be able to run a more streamlined operation. We will be able to get funding out the door quickly. Our capital projects will be able to move more efficiently through the process, and we're just working currently on that.
What's your vacancy rate right now?
I'd have to look up to see what that actual percentage is. I'll get back to you with that answer, but we will have it before the hearing closes.
Okay, I appreciate that. Well, I just want to thank you for your testimony. There were a number of things we went over, and I feel like the CDF data and the process, the panel process is really needs our attention and our collective collaboration. Because, the Independent Budget Office released an analysis of CDF data that showed about 80% of organizations received a cut. They received the cut on an average of 31%. But that this average masks substantial variation, especially when grouping by size of award, with smaller organizations receiving an average cut of 59%. Mm-hmm. And so we have also heard from organizations who lost all of their funding. So can you just explain, again, the variation in cuts, or at least what are you all going to do going forward to address the situation? Because after you all leave in a couple minutes, we're going to have many, many groups and individuals testify to their experience. So I'd just like them to hear before you go the variation in cuts and what we are going to do to fix the process once and for all.
So I just want to first start off by saying, before I go, sitting on that side of the table, I always was very disgruntled when commissioners would leave and run out of the room right after a hearing. I am here for the entire hearing. I want to hear from each and every person that came here to testify. I understand, and I'm going to say the reason why I ran for office was because I could no longer afford to come here, to come to Albany, to organize the bus trips, to protest on the steps of City Hall for more funding, to protest outside of the Department of Cultural Affairs for more funding. So I decided I needed to just run for office. So I just want to say to all of the organizations that are here, I see you. I know, especially with these gloomy financial times, the last place you need to spend all day today is here, but your presence is appreciated here. Your testimony is appreciated here. So I'll start by saying that. Secondly, I would say that we have done a lot internally in terms of how we're going to improve this process. So we have done a lot in terms of restructuring and working on the guidelines. We have put formal processes in place so that the agency runs more from a legal perspective versus a policy perspective. We've engaged with members of the community in the field to determine how to strengthen this. Many conversations have been held with many of you, our local elected leaders, so that we can have a better process moving forward. Because as Councilmember Carr has said, we do not want to go into a third year with the same process that is hurting so many of our organizations. Again, much of this was based off of the scoring. And oftentimes when the field talks about we want increased grant award sizes, we want more organizations to get funded, we want multi-year grants, we want a lot of things, but there's a give and take in terms of how wanting all of those things actually shapes out in the process. So we may want 125 new organizations, but we have to figure out how do we include those 125 organizations in a way that does not destabilize the 1,000 organizations that are already being funded. So a lot of those questions are going to have to be answered, and we're going to have solutions for them in the next budget process moving forward.
Okay. Again, the cuts, we hope that we're going to have better news. We demand, the restoration. We really need these organizations to have more trust in the city, and that's really only going to be acquired through restabilizing them and valuing them.
We are committed to a better process, but I just want to say there is no place or where that a budget that's going to consist of cuts at this level is ever going to be a satisfying process for all of those involved. Budget cuts are going to feel bad. They're going to feel terrible. They're going to amount to terrible hearings. They're going to amount to terrible discussions, terrible implications for the organizations. Budget cuts feel bad. They don't look good. They're not good for the city. They are not helpful, but they are a necessary evil to satisfying and moving forward our city in terms of like dire financial times. This is not a budget that any of us signed up for. This is unprecedented in terms of coming out of a global pandemic, coming out of a financial crisis that should have been managed by the federal government. All of these dynamics happening at the same time, as well as a campaign of many foundations and corporations pulling out of funding the arts, happening at the same time is not going to be or put forward a satisfactory result for the city and for a community that is the lifeline for this city. And so we're going to try to work through this very challenging budget cycle, and at the same time, we're going to have to talk to our other partners in the cultural community to come up with better solutions for stabilized support.
Well, we did pass a local law in relation to requiring DCLA, the commissioner specifically, to report annually on department funding of art and cultural organizations and institutions. That was Intro 1184. Can you provide us with the action plan for providing the geographical and the demographics in the reporting as it relates to the cultural organizations and institutions?
We have reviewed the local law that was passed last year, and we look forward to submitting our report when it's due at the end of this summer.
So your action plan is to get it done? If you can get it done sooner, that would make a lot more sense. And we're looking to see if we can actually figure out a cycle that occurs earlier in the year.
Yes, council members.
So diligence would be fantastic. The only thing I just would say to end this, besides thank you very, very much for your testimony, is that these organizations, they drive revenue, they grow our economy, and we need them to thrive. And all these factors, the revenue, the mental health, the support to our young people and our older adults, and free performances, and the life-changing programs and services that they provide. I just don't know how we can cut these organizations given these factors. So I look forward to the next few months and negotiations. And again, I thank you for your testimony and appreciate that you'll stay to hear from our friends and allies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Rivera. We will now turn to public testimony. We will be limiting public testimony today to 2 minutes each. For in-person panelists, please come up to the table once your name has been called. Our first in-person panel will be Lauren Comito, Leonard Paul, Deborah Allman, John Hyslop, and George Olkin.
Would you like to start? Okay.
I have to turn this on first, though. Thank you so much to Speaker Adams, Councilmember Rivera, the chair, and all the committee members for the opportunity to speak on the devastating budget proposal for libraries in fiscal year 2025. My name's Lauren Comito. I'm a librarian here in New York City and the executive director of Urban Librarians Unite, a 501c3 professional organization based here in New York City and Brooklyn. Every spring for the last 14 years, I've been involved in advocacy to restore funding to libraries. Every year during this painful process, we come to City Hall and someone inevitably says that a budget is a statement of priorities. But I would take it a step further. I would also say that a budget is a demonstration of vision and leadership. This preliminary budget, particularly when paired with yet another year of proposed mid-year cuts, demonstrates neither vision nor leadership. 7 budget cuts in 2 years have left providers like libraries unable to plan even a full 6 months of service. It has become yet again the burden of this body to save services like libraries that New Yorkers rely on. This Saturday, a patron came to my reference desk with a journal article and a circled citation, and they were looking for access to another journal article. And this is usually the most fun question. Somebody has a hard one, right? They want an article you may or may not be able to get. It's gonna be a fun question you can really dig into. I love these, usually. Couldn't find the article, so I dug deeper and I asked what it was about the topic she really wanted to know. Her real question was, given the diagnosis she had just gotten, how long did she have left to live? Libraries aren't just for assignments and reports in academic settings. We don't just find articles for school. We help people answer the pressing questions of their lives. Under this budget proposal, we'll lose at least half our Saturday services. She could very well walk up, instead of to help and an article and an answer, to a locked gate. So today, I'm imploring you to hold the line on these cuts. Fight back against them, restore library funding, and increase it, hopefully, so we can continue to be this human connection with our neighbors, connecting them to a sea of information that people can't find their way through on their own. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Councilman Rivera, Councilperson Rivera, and members of the committee. My name is Lenny Paul. I'm thankful for the opportunity to come before you today. We are asking for a full restoration of the mayor's pegs from the November modification and the preliminary budget totaling $35.5 million. And we're asking for the restoration and baselining of the $45 million from the City Council to the CIG programs, such as the Cultural After-School Adventures Program. Cultural institutions partner with the New York City Public School to provide educational programming and visits throughout the year. Without these programs, many low-income students will not have the opportunity to visit and experience the beauty of our world-class institution throughout the 5 boroughs. Without continued funding, many free educational programs for students and the public will be reduced or eliminated. Furthermore, this will limit the availability of career development and internship opportunities for students who are thinking of working in the cultural field. I would like to remind everyone that the CIG employs thousands of unionized workers. They provide a stable living wage for many New York City families. As a matter of fact, the Bronx Zoo is the largest employer of young workers in the Bronx who live and work in the community. If these cuts are not restored, it can lead to the elimination of many jobs, furloughs, and reduced hours at various institutions. Some institutions have already rolled out furloughs and hiring freezes. We have seen this occur in the past, and we are pleading for this not to happen again. It has been proven that in New York City, cultural institutions are economic drivers. This is true for the past and the present. Tourists come here to experience our world-class and world-renowned museums and famous botanic gardens. Our institutions are revenue generators that support local economies and businesses. We all remember how our institution played a key role in the city's economic revitalization after the worst economic downturn due to COVID-19. If we want our city to continue its economic recovery, the administration needs to invest in places that draw us tourism, which are our cultural institutions. In closing, I would like to reiterate that it's so vitally important for the city to restore the funding for our cultural treasures and for its workforce to survive. We really, really need this investment, and I thank you for your time.
Chairperson Rivera and fellow committee members, thank you for giving us an opportunity to submit this testimony on behalf of all the union workers of Brooklyn Public Library, New York Public Library, and Queens Public Library. We are united in our appeal for our elected officials to save our public libraries. In July 2023, the mayor and the city council agreed to a fiscal year 2024 budget that allowed library workers to provide all the library services our patrons expect 6 and 7 days a week across every borough. 5 months later, the mayor implemented a 5% budget cut that forced the libraries to cut a whole day of service, decimated materials budgets, eliminated maintenance budgets, and stopped them from hiring staff. The mayor's cut had no meaningful impact on the city's fiscal situation, but had a very meaningful and negative impact on the patrons of the city. Today, only 2 branches are open on Sunday, and they're closed on Saturday. Queens Library cannot afford Sunday service at Flushing, the busiest branch in the nation. Those who relied on Sunday service because that was the only day they could visit their branch are denied our services. Furthermore, this cut has impacted staff salaries who need that extra money to survive in New York City's ever-rising costs. The library systems have not been able to fill all the positions that have been made vacant from people who have left, and staffing levels are very low. Locations sometimes open with 2 or 3 library workers, limiting the ability to provide programs and services and creating very unsafe conditions for staff and patrons. Custodians cover multiple branches in one day, affecting the cleanliness and safety of these branches. Programs are cut because we do not have enough staff. Maintenance requests remain open longer because we do not have enough maintenance staff. Newly renovated branches cannot open because we do not have enough staff. The library systems have had to cut back our materials budgets. As we learned in the City Council's oversight hearing on book banning is a crisis across the country, including New York City. We cannot be effective fighting these book bans if we cannot buy books or keep our doors open. Many have stated that New York City is resilient and thriving, and that is true. Our spirit remains as defined and strong as ever. However, the majority of New Yorkers are still struggling with day-to-day expenses of our city. New York public libraries are one of the city's most democratic and trusted institutions. Our free, open, and clean spaces in every New York City community allow library workers to create literacy and community for everyone who walks through our doors. As the divide between those who have and those who do not have grows into a chasm, New Yorkers need our government resources. The only way library workers can do our vital work is for our elected officials to adopt a budget that is more than what we received in fiscal year 2024. That will allow us to grow and thrive. Thank you.
I just wanted to add a personal story. I drive the bookmobile. I'm the president of Local 1482, Brooklyn Public Library Guild. And we bring the library to the streets. We go to shelters, pantries. I've made hundreds of library cards for our newest neighbors. And we also cover for closed branches. And that depends upon the staff of the branches that are closed for renovations and stuff like that. And it depends upon the staff of those branches to join us. And as those staff have had to be reassigned around the system to plug holes where we're understaffed, that means we have to cut back on bookmobile programming, which means I have to pull away from bringing those services to the folks who can't reach the library for one reason or another, and it means we're reaching fewer people. And I think about, in particular, I sometimes park in the junction, Flatbush Junction, and there's a unhoused man, Haitian man, who comes to every week, and he's a regular. He's a regular on the street. He's a regular at the bookmobile. And when we have to remove service from a street corner, when we're all reassigned around the system to plug holes, it means that we're not reaching the folks who need us most. And so I just wanted to, just try to describe a little bit of how these understaffing, like how we're affected by them and how desperately we need more resources so that when a branch closes, staff can remain in their home neighborhood and continue to bring service to the communities, which is something we promise, but that we can't do if we're understaffed. Thank you.
I just want to thank you all so much. I know you represent the libraries, but also cultural institutions and the gardens, and how many days there's pay as you wish, or they're free, days for free that people can come and visit, and the Bronx Zoo being a large employer of young people. And I also, sometimes I feel like people forget about, or they just fail to really highlight how valuable it is, the staff that keeps the actual facilities going. So the maintenance and the cleanliness, and knowing that you can go into your library and be there for like 7 hours and have a clean bathroom and a great place to just work and thrive. So I just want to thank you all for your work and for sharing stories that are so deeply personal. Thank you for everything. Thank you.
Our next panel will be Shannon Rocket, Jessica Phillips, Coco Killingsworth, Nora Yaya, Erin Busca, and Jose Ortiz.
Is it on? Good afternoon, Chair Rivera and members of the committee. I'm Coco Killingsworth, Chief Experience and Impact Officer at BAM and Chair of the Cultural Institutions Group. I'm here today to provide testimony on behalf of the CIGs, a coalition of 34 cultural organizations across all 5 boroughs, including zoos, gardens, museums, and performing arts organizations. This is a critical time for the cultural community and the CIG. The city's relationship with the CIGs is based on partnership. CIGs are nonprofits operating in public facilities for the benefit of all